The year is somewhere around 7000 BC. The land we now call Baluchistan is a patchwork of parched hills and fertile patches along the Bolan Pass, where the desert finally yields to a thin green thread of life. The morning air tastes of dust and barley chaff. Out here, the first farmers of Mergar begin their quiet revolution, not with bronze or writing, but with patience and seeds. They live in houses made of mud brick, simple rectangles, 4 by 6 meters, but each one already an act of defiance against the old wandering life. Inside the floors are packed earth and the walls thick enough to hold back the heat of day. There are grinding stones in one corner, a hearth in another, and jars for grain lined with plaster to keep out moisture. No one writes their names on these walls, but their fingerprints still press through the clay 7,000 years later. They plant wheat and barley, early local varieties that they have slowly coaxed from wild grasses. Every morning, they bend to the fields with stone blades and basket hats, scraping irrigation channels through the soft soil. The miracle isn't the harvest itself, but the idea that the earth can be made reliable, that the seasons can be reasoned with. The first storage pits mean the first concept of later, and with it, the birth of planning of hope of civilization. At night, fires dot the plain. Goats huddle near their owners, sheep bleat softly against the wind. Somewhere in those fires, a metal melts. For the first time, copper drawn from the hills, hammered into tiny ornaments that glint in torchlight. They don't know it yet, but that spark of curiosity will ignite the entire Bronze Age. Nearby, a young girl paints geometric swirls on a pot, her hand steady as though guided by memory older than speech. Every line is a symbol of a new idea beauty that doesn't need to be useful. In the fields, strange creatures graze half-wild zebu cattle with humped backs and temper to match. They're massive, stubborn, and impossible not to respect. One of them bucks against a rope, snorting steam in the cool dawn air. The farmers don't realize they're changing the genetics of the future. These are the ancestors of millions of working animals that will one day plow fields from Pakistan to Cambodia. Step by step, the wild becomes the domesticated. The hunt becomes the harvest. Trade already exists if you know where to look. A small copper bead found at Mergar matches ores from the nearby mountains. A seashell bracelet comes from hundreds of kilometers away. Someone has walked those distances for this object, which means someone else has bargained for it. Even in prehistory, the world was connected by small acts of curiosity and commerce. We often imagine civilization as a moment of sudden grandeur, pyramids, rising armies, marching. But its true birth is quieter. A woman weaving reed baskets in the shade, a man experimenting with a kiln that burns a little hotter than yesterday. The first pottery cracks, then improves. The next batch holds water. Trial becomes tradition. Innovation becomes routine. And routine over generations becomes culture. Dawn breaks again over the Bolan Hills, and the smell of damp soil carries through the air. The rains have passed. The Indus tributaries are swollen and shining like mirrors laid across the plains. In the distance, figures move slowly among rows of barley that ripple in the early light. This is no longer the hesitant experiment of wild gatherers. This is a people who have learned to bend the rhythm of nature just enough to make it sing in tune with them. The people of Mergar and other early settlements that will someday form the beating heart of the Indus world have crossed a threshold that humankind can never uncross. They have learned that a seed placed with care can be persuaded to remember where it came from, that harvest is no longer a gift of chance, but a partnership. Their wheat, their barley, even their peas and sesame are all native experiments rather than borrowed miracles. No Sumerian trader brought them this knowledge. No Egyptian priest whispered it across the desert. They found it here in the pulse of the monsoon, in the slow observation of soil and season. The fields are quiet, except for the low murmur of conversation and the rhythmic creak of wooden plows. These early farmers understand water as a kind of god, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel. Canals are shallow and simple, but the logic behind them is profound. Lead the stream where you want it to go, and the earth will follow. When the rains falter, the people dig deeper, patient as the land itself. The reward is abundance, enough grain, not just for eating, but for storing, trading, even dreaming. Storage is the first form of security, and with it comes imagination. Clay bins, sealed with plaster, hold the surplus that will feed the community through lean months. Someone must guard that surplus. Someone must measure it. And so appear the first keepers of order, the earliest accountants of human history, crouching beside granaries, counting seeds like stars. Out of grain comes hierarchy, and out of hierarchy, the first faint notion of society. In the animal pens nearby, another revolution is unfolding. The goat and sheep are old companions by now, docile milk-bearing patient, but something larger and far more ambitious moves in the corrals, the zebu cattle beasts, with humped backs and deep eyes like pools of molten amber. They have been slowly coaxed from the wild bred for endurance and shaped into living engines of survival. When yoked to a plow, they can tear through the heavy Indus soil that no human arm could conquer alone. Their strength turns the idea of surplus into a guarantee. Water buffalo join the chorus, later thick-skinned, broad-horned, able to wade through flooded fields where cattle would drown. Their hooves churn the wet soil into life. Their milk is rich, their hides strong, their temper legendary. They are the true founding fathers of South Asian agriculture, though history gives them no monuments. You can almost hear their labored breath in the distance, echoing through 5,000 years of cultivation. The farmers have begun to notice things, how the best calves come from certain mothers, how planting barley after wheat makes the soil happier, how fire turns brittle clay into something permanent. Knowledge accumulates like sediment in a riverbed, slow but unstoppable. In their minds, a blueprint of civilization begins to take shape. At dusk, families gather by their hearths, where grinding stones hum like insects and the scent of cooked grain fills the air. Children chew roasted dates while their parents debate which field to sow next season. Life is modest, yet its rhythms are astonishingly stable. Each generation inherits not just tools and land, but memory of floods, survived seeds, saved animals tamed. The earth has become a library, and each field a page. Yet not everything is serenity. Farming ties people to place, and with it comes vulnerability. Drought can starve. Floods can erase months of labor. The very rivers that feed them can also betray them. To manage that uncertainty, the people learn cooperation. Irrigation ditches need cleaning, canals need digging, and walls need mending. For the first time in human history, survival depends not on individual cunning, but on collective rhythm. Civilization, though still nameless, begins in teamwork. A visitor wandering through these early villages might be surprised by how lively they are. Potters shape their clay beside farmers threshing grain. Herdsmen sing to restless animals as smoke curls from rooftops. The air is thick with sound, the dull clang of stone tools, the creak of wooden plows, the rhythmic pounding of grain. Here in this simple music of labor lies the hum of something extraordinary, the coordination of thousands of minds, without a single king to command them. The domesticated landscape transforms not only their economy, but their imagination. Animals are no longer just food or muscle. They are symbols companions, even gods. A child ties a bead around a calf's neck for luck. A potter paints the outline of a humped bull on a jar, its horns curling like the crescent moon. These are not idle decorations. They are the first metaphors, the earliest attempts to understand the mysterious partnership between man, beast, and soil. The villagers of Mehrgar and their neighbors do not know that elsewhere, far beyond the mountains, other civilizations are taking root in Mesopotamia. The Tigris and Euphrates are carving their own destiny. In China, the Yellow River hums with the same promise. But the Indus people are not imitators. Their world evolves in parallel, a third cradle of civilization, born of its own logic, its own monsoon rhythm, its own patience. From their perspective, life is simply life, measured in seasons, floods, and births. But to us, looking back through millennia, we can see what they cannot, how their steady hands laid the groundwork for cities that would someday astonish the world. Every brick that will rise in Mohenjo-Daro, every seal that will be carved in Harappa traces its lineage to these anonymous farmers guiding cattle through the dawn mist. If farming was the heartbeat of early civilization, then craftsmanship was its pulse, the subtle rhythm of hands transforming earth and fire into something enduring. In the dusty courtyards of Mehrgar, where goats bleat and wind hisses across the flat roofs, the first artisans begin their quiet revolution. They are not warriors or priests or kings. They are makers, people who look at a lump of clay and see possibility. Picture a woman crouched near a low kiln, the air thick with smoke and the sharp scent of heated earth. Her hair is tied with a strip of reed fiber, her forearms streaked with red dust. She lifts a small jar from the embers using wooden tongs. The jar glows faintly, the color of sunrise ochre deepening to terracotta. When it cools, she traces a fingertip along its rim, checking for cracks. It will hold water, or grain, or oil, or maybe nothing at all, serving only to please the eye. In that small act of care lies something astonishing, the awakening of design. Pottery begins as pure necessity. Water doesn't stay in baskets. Grain spoils in the open. But soon, utility gives way to artistry. The potter's hands start adding lines and swirls, painting animals, goats, birds, and bulls in confident strokes of black and red. The designs spread like language. A jar from one village matches the motifs of another hundreds of kilometers away, proof that ideas travel faster than people. Even before writing, the Indus world is already speaking through patterns, geometry, and color. The earliest pottery is fired in open pits, blackened by uneven heat. But experimentation never sleeps. Someone somewhere learns to build a small dome of mud bricks, leaving a vent for air and smoke. The first kiln is born, and with it control. Temperature timing, oxygen, the artisans learn to master the invisible elements. Firing becomes alchemy. The earth hardens, pigments deepen, and clay once fragile as dust becomes eternal. Children watch the potters, with wide eyes mimicking their motions in miniature. They form toys, tiny bulls, with rolling wheels, whistles shaped like birds. Some archaeologists will one day dig up these toys and marvel at how the simplest things reveal the most complex minds. Behind each toy hides a question that changed the world. What else can I make? Beyond the pottery yards, another kind of workshop hums with a different fire. The smell here is acrid metallic. Inside small furnaces, stones from the nearby hills are melting into liquid light copper. It is 4500 BC, give or take a century, and someone has learned to smelt ore. They crush the stones with hammering stones, feed them into charcoal flames, and watch as veins of bright metal trickle out. The result is crude, imperfect, but utterly new. A bead here, a small blade there. Nothing dramatic, no swords or spears, just ornaments and tools useful and beautiful in equal measure. Metallurgy begins humbly, but it changes everything. Copper means sharper edges, longer lives for tools, fewer blisters on calloused palms. It also means trade because copper doesn't exist everywhere. Someone has to go into the hills to find it, and someone else has to carry it back. Thus, the first trade networks pulse through the subcontinent like unseen arteries. Imagine a caravan setting out from the hills, donkeys laden with copper nodules and bundles of reeds. They follow the rivers, resting near settlements, where pottery and grain are exchanged for metal. Along the way, strangers greet one another, not as enemies, but as partners, recognizing the seal of familiarity stamped into each handmade vessel. The Indus world is still centuries from building its great cities, but already it is learning the art of connection. In another corner of the settlement, artisans sit cross-legged in the shade, stringing beads of carnelian and agate. Each bead takes hours, days, even to polish and pierce, with a hole so tiny you could fit a hair through it. The tools are primitive, a bow drill spun by hand sand and water for friction. But the precision is extraordinary. These beads gleam with the same luster as modern jewelry, each one a whisper from an age before history. Perhaps a mother wears one as a charm against sickness. Perhaps a trader offers a necklace as payment for grain. The beads become more than decoration. They are identity, wealth, and memory, all strung together on a thread of humanity's oldest instinct to create something that outlasts us. And then comes paint. The potters of Mehrgarh discover that a mix of iron oxide and ash can make black lines dance on red clay. They paint birds with beaks mid-song, fish with curling tails, and abstract shapes that repeat across generations. The designs seem simple, yet their precision hints at something deliberate, an early aesthetic code, a shared sense of what is right. You can almost imagine them arguing gently. No, not that line. It must curve like the river. Fire, meanwhile, becomes their teacher and their judge. Too much heat, and the clay warps. Too little, and it crumbles. The potters learn by failure, and failure becomes innovation. Out of these small adjustments emerges a quiet kind of genius, the science of temperature, pressure, chemistry, all without a single written note. The rhythm of the village hums around these crafts. The clack of pottery wheels, the low roar of kilns, the bleat of animals, the laughter of children. Civilization doesn't feel grand or heroic here. It feels domestic, built by calloused fingers and curious eyes. Yet every jar, every bead, every ingot of copper pushes humanity a little further from nature's whim and a little closer to mastery. In time, other materials join the dance lead, bronze, perhaps even gold, from distant streams. But clay remains the canvas of their culture. Clay records what their words cannot. It remembers their shapes, their handprints, their thoughts pressed into form. The story of the Indus Valley is above all the story of water. It begins as a whisper from the high Himalayas, melting glaciers trickling into streams, then swelling into rivers that twist through gorges and floodplains before spilling their silver lifeblood into the Arabian Sea. From above, the Indus and her tributaries, the Ravi Bass, Chenab Jhelum, and Sutlej, look like veins across a living body. Each one pulses with the same rhythm, rise with the summer monsoon, rest in the cool of winter, and begin again. Here, between mountain and ocean, lies one of the world's most generous floodplains. When the rains come, the rivers spill over their banks, leaving behind blankets of silt as fine as flower soil, so rich it can glow gold under the sun. For the first farmers who dared settle these plains, it must have felt like discovering the gods' personal irrigation plan. The rivers did not destroy, as the Tigris or Euphrates sometimes did. They nourished. The floods were rhythmic, almost polite, just dangerous enough to command respect, yet predictable enough to build a future upon. Imagine the scene around 4000 BC, a network of villages scattered along river bends, their mud brick homes perched on slightly raised ground to avoid the seasonal waters. From above, you'd see thin green rectangles of cultivated fields stretching like carpets along the banks. Between them, small canals and irrigation ditches crisscross the earth, carrying glimmering threads of diverted water. Men stand knee-deep in flooded paddies, guiding plows drawn by humped cattle. Women in bright-dyed cloths plant barley and wheat with rhythmic precision. Children run along the embankments, chasing frogs released by the flood. In this rhythm of rising and falling waters, something deeper takes shape, a civilization beginning to synchronize itself with the planet's pulse. The Indus people do not fight the river. They listen to it. They study its moods, mark the seasons of its breath, and learn to bend with its cycles. In their patience lies genius. Rather than conquer nature, they cooperate with it. From the river also comes clay, the same soft earth that potters spin into perfect symmetry. And reeds, woven into baskets, mats, and boats. The Indus doesn't just feed bodies, it fuels imagination. On its banks, the first cargo rafts float downstream, loaded with jars of grain, bright beads, and rough-cut copper. The river is both highway and marketplace. Villages that once eyed each other across the floodplain now trade as neighbors. In the slow drift of boats along the current, the idea of distance itself begins to fade. Fishermen anchor at dusk to roast their catch on the sand. They gossip about upstream travelers who bring strange shells from the sea or shiny blue stones from the mountains. A new world is unfolding, a connected world, and the Indus River is its silent messenger. Over time, the settlements grow bolder. The people build closer to the water, trusting its rhythm, even taming it. They dig canals with coordinated labor walls of packed earth that direct the monsoon's bounty where they please. The act is almost spiritual, turning chaos into order, turning flood into fertility. Each irrigation channel is both engineering and offering. Here we have learned your language, O river. Please keep speaking kindly. At the edge of one such settlement, you can hear the sound of pounding clay and laughter. The harvest has been good this year. Pots overflow with grain, and traders have come from distant hills to barter salt and copper. The air smells of roasted barley and sweet smoke. In the evening light, you might even see a new sight, a line of boats tied together with ropes forming a floating bridge. People cross from one bank to another, as if the river itself has agreed to serve. Far to the north, the mountains are still whispering snowmelt into tributaries. The great Indus flows with majestic calm, collecting the labors of thousands of unseen hands. Along its path, new names begin to appear in the archaeological record. Amri Kot Diji Kalibangan, proto-cities, rising like small experiments in order. Their inhabitants build low, defensive walls, lay out streets in faint grids, and begin to separate space by purpose. Workshops here, homes there, storage beyond. The river, ever dependable, makes it all possible. But even gods can shift. Climate, though gentle for millennia, begins to change its mind around 4000 BC. The rains weaken slightly, forests thin. The people adapt, they always do, but the shift teaches them something invaluable. Predictability is precious. The river's regularity becomes not just a blessing, but a necessity. To protect it, to understand it, is to survive. Every innovation that follows, from the first reservoir to the monumental Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, will echo this early lesson: water is civilization. Without it, cities are dust. With it, even dust can become divine. At night, under the same stars that glimmered over Mesopotamia and Egypt, The Indus glows faintly with phosphorescent life. Fish leap against the current. Torches flicker along the banks as people walk the embankments, checking dikes and canals. In one hut, a woman fills a jar with clear water, whispering a blessing before sealing it. In another, a man carves the outline of a wave onto a pot, marking it as property of the river itself. No written text survives to tell us what they believed, but their architecture speaks clearly enough. They built their homes around courtyards with drains. They raised their villages on platforms safe from floods. They oriented their lives to the water's will, as though each sunrise were a renewal of their contract with the river. The Indus gave them order, and perhaps without intending it, taught them geometry, engineering, and humility. As centuries pass, those lessons deepen. Villages stretch into towns. Towns echo the murmurs of cities yet unborn. Trade flows farther. Copper from Baluchistan, lapis from Afghanistan, shells from the coast, all drifting along these watery highways. Each new current carries not just goods, but ideas. Someone notices that fired bricks last longer in damp weather. Someone else learns to store grain above ground, away from floodwater. Improvement follows improvement, and the river watches it all with a slow, approving patience. The Indus people do not carve their stories in stone, nor raise pyramids to catch the eye of eternity. Their monuments are practical levees that hold canals, that breathe, and reservoirs that reflect the sky. Their greatness lies not in shouting their existence, but in sustaining it quietly. By 3500 BC, the seeds of urban life are already sprouting along these floodplains. The rivers have chosen their disciples wisely. The people of the Indus have learned that civilization doesn't have to rise in defiance of nature. It can rise in partnership with it. The centuries pass quietly, at first marked only by the slow widening of walls and the deepening of wells. Yet something subtle is happening along the Indus, and its sister rivers, a shift in tempo, a faint drumbeat of ambition beneath the pastoral calm. By 3500 BC, the familiar world of small farming villages begins to hum with new complexity. The seeds of urban life of order, hierarchy, and coordination have begun to sprout. At Kot Diji, near the eastern edge of the Indus Plains, the air rings with sound, the steady rhythm of hammers on copper, the hiss of kilns, the chatter of traders measuring grain in carved stone cubes. The settlement is larger than the others now, not just a cluster of homes, but a community with a plan. Low defensive walls curve along its perimeter, their fired brick faces still bearing the handprints of their builders. Within those walls lie the clues to humanity's next great leap, evidence of planning specialization, and maybe the first glimmers of civic pride. Life here is no longer purely about survival. It's about systems. Whole neighborhoods are devoted to pottery, to metalwork, to beads, each craft occupying its own quarter, like organs within a growing body. Smoke rises from workshops at dawn and lingers until nightfall, streaking the sky above the flat roofs. The potter's wheels spin faster and smoother now, powered by techniques passed from one generation of artisans to the next. Vessels once irregular and handmade are now so uniform they could be mistaken for factory work. It's not mass production, not yet, but it's the first time humanity begins to flirt with the idea. A visitor walking through Kot Diji's narrow streets would hear the clang of copper being beaten into shape. The metal workers there have become masters of the small miracle of smelting. They melt the ore in crucibles lined with clay and bone ash, adding crushed stone and charcoal until the liquid gleams like molten sunlight. The first bronze alloys appear copper mixed with tin, harder, sharper, more durable. Tools, chisels, knives, and tiny ornaments begin to circulate through the market stalls. The air smells of soot, sweat, and opportunity. Trade expands in every direction. From the west, traders arrive with blue stones, lapis lazuli, from the mountains of Afghanistan wrapped carefully in wool. From the east, shells from the distant Arabian Sea glitter in the baskets of merchants who have walked for weeks. In return, Kot Diji sends out beads of carnelian and agate, smooth as rain-polished pebbles, the color of embers. Each bead carries more than beauty. It carries proof that someone somewhere has learned to shape perfection through repetition. The network widens. Caravans begin to link these growing settlements, Mergar, Kot Diji Amri Kalibangan, into a web of exchange stretching hundreds of kilometers. Goods move hand to hand, a copper blade for a string of shells, a pot of sesame oil for a bundle of wool. Along these routes, ideas hitch rides. Someone in one town learns to stack bricks in precise ratios. Someone else adopts a new pattern for pottery decoration. Technology doesn't just spread, it converges, weaving local traditions into a shared cultural fabric. In the evening, as fires glow in every courtyard, you can feel a new rhythm in the air, a kind of civic heartbeat. Families gather to grind grain. Children chase each other down the dusty lanes. But behind these familiar scenes lies a more organized world. Grain storage is now communal, sealed in large silos under watchful eyes. Tools are standardized. Weights and measures, those small cubes of chert and limestone found across the region, match perfectly from site to site. Somewhere, people have begun to agree on rules. Civilization, for all its later glory, begins with nothing more glamorous than consistency. And yet consistency changes everything. Once people can measure, they can plan. Once they can plan, they can build. The result is visible in the streets themselves, straightened, widened, aligned, roughly north-south and east-west, as if drawn by an unseen surveyor's hand. The homes are humble still, of mud brick, but they now cluster in rows, forming neighborhoods with distinct purposes. It's not chaos anymore, it's intention. Alongside this order comes inequality, though of a modest sort. Some graves in Kot Diji contain jewelry, copper tools, or fine painted pottery, while others hold little more than a clay bowl and a body curled on its side. The gap is not yet wide, but it's there, the faint line between those who organize and those who obey. Power, for the first time, begins to accumulate. It doesn't yet take the form of kings or temples. Instead, it hides in accounting, in the ability to count grain record trades and command labor for communal walls. A traveler might sense this new gravity even without words. Where once villages hummed like small households, these proto-cities hum like engines. There is rhythm, hierarchy, and above all, purpose. Beyond the walls, the surrounding landscape reflects this transformation. Fields stretch farther. Irrigation ditches grow deeper and more complex. Herds of cattle move in orderly lines toward the riverbanks at dusk. The zebu's heavy footfalls beat a steady counterpoint to the sound of hammers and spinning wheels. The land and the people are working in tandem now, their cycles intertwined. By 3200 BC, the Indus region glows with a quiet confidence. Dozens of settlements thrive, each echoing the same layout, the same crafts, the same symbols etched on pottery, perhaps early attempts at writing, or simply marks of ownership. The people are building not just towns, but a civilization with a shared identity. Night falls on Kot Diji. The fires in the workshops dim, and the faint murmur of conversation drifts through the warm air. From the citadel, a raised platform where elders meet, one can look out across the rooftops and see the glow of hundreds of hearths. Each one burns with the same small, determined flame that has carried humanity this far. Down below, a potter's apprentice checks his kiln one last time. Inside, a new batch of jars hardens in the heat, their surfaces painted with looping lines and careful dots. He doesn't know it yet, but those jars will be found thousands of years later, perfectly preserved, bearing witness to this turning point, the moment when scattered farmers became city builders. The dawn that rose around 2600 BC found the Indus world transformed. Where once scattered villages clung to the banks of rivers, there now stretched vast cities, planned symmetrical, astonishingly modern. The quiet centuries of trial and tinkering had culminated in a sudden architectural awakening, a leap so elegant that later civilizations would still struggle to match its precision. Humanity had gone from shaping clay jars to shaping entire landscapes. If one could fly over the plains of the Indus during this age, perhaps as a bird riding the monsoon wind, one would see geometry made visible. Cities carved into grids, their streets meeting at perfect right angles. Citadels raised high on brick platforms, lower towns spread neatly below. To the west, Harappa gleamed beside the Ravi River, its reddish bricks catching the sunrise. 600 kilometers south, Mohenjo-Daro shimmered on the Sindh plain, its orderly avenues bordered by homes with courtyards and wells. Between them, other cities flourished like siblings, Kalibangan, Dolavira Lothal, and dozens more, each echoing the same silent genius. No king's decree announced this revolution. There are no carved stelae, no triumphal inscriptions, no conquering armies. Instead, the transformation seems to have happened collectively. Thousands of planners, masons, and engineers quietly agreeing on a vision. The Indus cities rose not from conquest, but from coordination. Civilization, it turns out, can organize itself without shouting. In Harappa, the air smells of freshly fired brick. Kilns burn day and night, their flames licking through the haze as carts bring clay from riverbanks. Each brick is identical, following the sacred ratio: 1x to 2x 4, height, width, and length in perfect proportion. A mason in the north and another in the far south could trade bricks and never notice a difference. This uniformity will later astonish archaeologists, who will realize that such standardization requires not just skill, but a shared measurement system, a civilization literally built to the same scale. The city itself is divided by purpose. To the west, on elevated ground, rises the citadel, thick-walled, monumental, yet strangely functional. No palaces or temples, just granaries, assembly halls, and bathing structures. Below stretches the lower town residential districts where people live, trade, and craft. Streets align with mathematical precision, wide enough for 2 bullock carts to pass side by side. Each neighborhood has its own well and drainage, its own rhythm of life. Walk those streets in the cool of morning. The houses modest but thoughtful face inward onto shaded courtyards. The outer walls are windowless for privacy and insulation against the heat, but inside rooms open to sunlight and air. Some houses rise 2 stories high. Steps lead up to flat roofs where families dry grain or sleep beneath the stars. You can hear the low murmur of conversation, merchants haggling, children laughing, a woman grinding wheat on a stone quern. The smell of sesame oil and wet clay lingers everywhere. The most remarkable sound, though, might be the absence of chaos. The city is alive but orderly. Its drains, covered, sloped, and interlinked, carry wastewater out from every home. Inspection holes dot the streets for cleaning. Even the smallest lane connects to the main sewer flowing down toward the river. It is infrastructure as philosophy, cleanliness, not as luxury, but as civic duty. Thousands of years later, when Rome and London still reek of open gutters, the ghosts of Harappa will seem almost futuristic. And then there is Mohenjo-Daro, the masterpiece. From afar, it appears as a terraced mound rising from the plain, crowned with massive walls. But step closer, and the city reveals its heart, the Great Bath. 12 meters long, 7 wide, 2.5 deep, lined with watertight brick and bitumen, filled by wells, drained by precision-engineered sluices. It gleams under the sun, like a mirror of bronze. This is not a mere pool. It is a symbol, a place of cleansing, perhaps even of ceremony. Imagine hundreds of citizens descending its steps, their movements slow and deliberate, the water rippling around them in silence. A civilization whose highest monument is not a temple or a tomb, but a public bath, speaks volumes about its priorities. Nearby stand the granaries, colossal halls, where grain is stored in raised bins, ventilated by air channels beneath the floors. Workers move in lines, lifting sacks, measuring weight with carved stone cubes, sealing each storehouse with clay tokens stamped with animal symbols. Every motion is purposeful, efficient, almost bureaucratic. If ancient Egypt was ruled by divine kings and Mesopotamia by priestly scribes, then the Indus seems ruled by planners, anonymous, tireless, and astonishingly practical. Even the ports are engineered wonders. Down in Gujarat, at Lothal, masons have carved a massive rectangular basin into the land, lined with bricks and fitted with spillways, the world's earliest known dockyard. Ships from the Arabian Sea moor here, their hulls creaking as goods are unloaded. Timber from the Deccan shells, copper beads, perhaps even spices. Merchants record their cargo using seals carved from steatite, each marked with a few mysterious symbols, the script that no one, not even we, can read. The symbols travel farther than the ships stamped on clay and ivory, turning up in Mesopotamian cities thousands of kilometers away. At dusk, the cities glow with oil lamps. In the upper citadel, an overseer checks the alignment of a new street plumb line, steady measuring cord taut. In a workshop, a potter lifts a batch of fine red ware from his kiln, its black painted patterns gleaming like ink. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks at a stringed instrument, and the sound drifts over the rooftops like birdsong. Everything feels deliberate. The city breathes like an organism. It drains the veins, its wells, the lungs, its granaries, the stomach. It is as if an entire civilization has agreed to live according to geometry and grace. And yet behind the efficiency lies warmth. Archaeologists will one day find terracotta toys, dice for games, and tiny clay figurines of women wearing elaborate jewelry. These were not people of cold precision. They were people who knew how to live well inside their systems. When you stand on a high wall in Mohenjo-Daro and look out across its perfect grid, it's hard not to feel awe. Here, 40,600 years ago, ordinary citizens enjoyed running water, indoor plumbing, and trash collection achievements some modern cities still struggle with. And all of it was done without armies, without kings, without boastful inscriptions. What held it together? Shared belief, perhaps, mutual dependence, or simply the habit of excellence that had grown brick by brick from the quiet hands of farmers and potters over the centuries. Whatever the secret, it worked. Morning comes to Mohenjo-Daro, not with trumpets or smoke from temples, but with the soft murmur of water being drawn from wells. It's a sound that defines the city, steady, rhythmic, eternal. The sun rises pale and golden over the brick skyline, glinting off hundreds of flat roofs, drying last night's dew from the courtyards below. From above, the city looks impossibly deliberate, every street straight, every wall aligned, every block, a small masterpiece of symmetry. It feels less like something built than something designed, as if some vast architect had drawn it with a compass and string, then left it to hum along by itself. But there is no king here, No pharaoh's face carved in stone, no god-king issuing decrees. Mohenjo-Daro governs itself with precision, born not from tyranny, but from consensus. Walk its streets, and you'll feel that perfection humming beneath your feet. The main avenues stretch wide enough for carts to pass, shaded by the soft outlines of brick facades. Secondary lanes branch neatly into residential rows, narrowing into shaded alleys where the air smells faintly of clay and sesame oil. The heat will rise soon, but for now, the morning is kind, cool breezes off the river. Quiet voices echoing from behind courtyard walls. Each house here feels like a small sanctuary. On the outside, the walls are plain blank and strong, turning inward from the noise of the street. But step inside, and you enter a space of light and order. Courtyards breathe open at the center, ringed by rooms for cooking, sleeping, and storage. Ladders or stairways rise to upper floors, where balconies overlook the lanes. A single well often serves the entire home, carved deep into the earth and lined with carefully fitted bricks. Then there are the drains, those legendary drains, the pride of Mohenjo-Daro. Every home is connected to a covered sewer that runs beneath the street, sloping gently downward so water flows away cleanly. Inspection holes, manholes, settling pits. It's all there, a system so effective that you could quite literally live above it without ever smelling it. 2,000 years before Rome, these citizens already had sanitation, plumbing, and privacy. Civilization here is not loud, it's civilized. At the heart of the upper city stands the Great Bath. The structure seems to float in sunlight, a vast rectangle of baked brick surrounded by galleries and staircases. The pool's sides are lined with bitumen, waterproof, glossy, ancient engineering, still perfect after 5,000 years. Steps descend from either end, and at the bottom, the water lies still clear enough to reflect the pale sky. This is no mere luxury bath. You can feel it in the silence. Even the wind hushes as it crosses the surface. People enter reverently, washing before prayer, or perhaps before nothing more than a sense of spiritual clarity. The Indus people left us no scriptures to explain what they believed, but the Great Bath speaks for them cleanliness, as ritual purity as philosophy. Their holiest site is not a mountain or a tomb. It's a pool of water open to all. Around the bath stand other great civic buildings. The granary, vast and functional, hums with the controlled chaos of administration. Workers move through aisles of raised brick platforms, spreading grain to dry checking for mold, scooping handfuls into woven baskets. Channels beneath the floors keep air moving, ingenious natural ventilation before there were even words for such things. Every handful of grain is a promise that this city will eat, that it will endure. Farther down in the lower town, the air is busier. You can hear the rhythmic clack of looms, the faint chiming of metal, the laughter of children chasing clay carts through narrow lanes. Workshops hum, with activity bead makers shaping carnelian into jewels of sunset orange bronze smiths, hammering tools that gleam like honey in the light. At a market stall, a merchant weighs spices on a tiny balance scale using standard cubes of chert as weights. A customer, a woman in a red shawl, bangles gleaming on her wrists, examines the goods with practiced eyes. Fairness is expected here. Every transaction is a ritual of trust. The smell of the city is a tapestry of life clay, dust boiling, grain cow dung, fuel salt, and a faint sweetness of date palm. Dogs trot lazily down the lanes, avoiding carts laden with pottery. Everywhere, water trickles into drains, from jars over stone basins. Mohenjo-Daro breathes water. There are no grand temples to break the skyline. Instead, the spiritual life of the city hides in plain sight in small household shrines, in fire altars, in clay figurines of goddesses and bulls. Archaeologists will one day call this domestic religion, but perhaps it's something simpler, a culture where the sacred lives in the ordinary, where divinity is found in cleanliness, in symmetry, in competence. In the evening, when the heat dies, the city softens. The streets fill with families. People sit on their doorsteps and share bread, baked in tandoor-like ovens, chatting about the day's harvest or trade news from Lothal. Musicians pluck stringed instruments and blow on flutes of bird bone. Somewhere dice clatter on a clay board, a game older than empires. You can almost hear laughter echoing between the walls, bright and easy, unbothered by fear of kings or famine. Mohenjo-Daro feels secure, confident, self-contained. The city is no fortress, but a home, a masterpiece of planning sustained by something rarer than power, mutual respect. And yet, its silence holds a mystery. For all its brilliance, the city left behind no monuments, no epic tales carved in stone. Its language etched in tiny pictographs on seals and tablets remains unreadable, its people anonymous. No hero, no ruler, no architect claims this place. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the civilization's true genius was collective, the understanding that harmony could exist without hierarchy, that perfection could emerge not from command, but from cooperation. If Mohenjo-Daro was the jewel of the Indus, Harappa was its heart. To the north, where the Ravi River once ran wide and green, the city rises like a terraced island from the floodplain. Its walls gleam red under the morning sun, every brick perfectly aligned in that familiar 1-2-4 rhythm, the same ratio echoing across hundreds of kilometers. You could walk from one Indus city to another and never need to relearn how to build, how to measure, or even how to live. The system was universal, the culture seamless, a quiet federation of order stretching from Baluchistan to Gujarat. Here in Harappa, the air feels busier, more industrious than in the southern cities. Traders arrive by boat and cart their goods, piled high ivory combs from the forests to the East copper tools from the Rajasthan mines, bright beads of lapis lazuli from far-off Afghanistan. On the docks, workers shout instructions and wave bundles of rope. Somewhere in the distance, the steady hammering of a bronze smith keeps rhythm with the creaking of bullock carts. The city itself is divided like all its sisters into two worlds, the raised citadel and the sprawling lower town. The citadel rises 15 meters above the plain, its base fortified by massive brick walls that might once have served both defense and dignity, a high place for civic order, for storage for ceremony. On the lower ground lies the everyday city, a living labyrinth of homes, courtyards, workshops, and bazaars. Between the two, the streets run like veins, guiding water people and goods in precise harmony. Stand at the edge of Harappa's walls, and you can see the civilization breathing. To your left, smoke drifts from kilns. To your right, farmers lead buffalo toward the riverbanks, their broad horns glistening in the light. Below, a line of men pushes wooden carts laden with brick, while women carry baskets of barley on their heads, laughing in the dust. The scene feels timeless, as if the city has existed forever, its routines so efficient they might run without memory or command. In the lower town, the workshops are alive with craft. Bead makers sit cross-legged, drilling perfect holes into agate and carnelian, with tools that hum softly like insects. Metal workers pour molten copper into clay molds, their furnaces roaring. Potters pull gleaming vessels from kilns, tapping them gently with wooden sticks to test their tone. The air is rich with the smell of clay smoke and roasted grain. Even the smallest homes reflect a kind of graceful logic. Each has a well for fresh water, a bathing platform, a drainage outlet that connects seamlessly to the covered street sewers. Even the humblest houses participate in the same civic system as the grandest proof that this was a society built on a quality of infrastructure, if not of wealth. No one here seems exempt from the order of things. Everyone contributes to the same quiet choreography of cleanliness and precision. Across the river plains, Harappa's sister cities hum with their own variations on the theme. To the southeast, Kalibangan sits along the now dry Gagar River, its streets laid out in the familiar grid, but with a curious difference: furrowed fields surrounding the walls still visible in the soil thousands of years later. Here, farmers mastered the rotation of crops: wheat in one season, barley in the next. Archaeologists will later find the faint parallel lines of plow marks preserved beneath the sandproof of meticulous planning. In the citadel above, fire altars sit in neat rows, ash still clinging to the brick. They speak of rituals, perhaps purification, perhaps prayer, performed by hands that believed order on earth mirrored order in the cosmos. Far to the southwest lies Dolavira, the desert city perched on the salty flats of Kuch. It should not exist at all, its environment hostile, its rains rare, but the people who built it refused to yield. They carved out reservoirs from solid rock, 16 of them, each one designed to catch the fickle monsoon. Canals run from every slope, channeling each drop into storage basins deep enough to last through drought. The main reservoir stretches 70 meters long, lined with stone blocks so precisely cut that no water escapes. From the citadel, stairways descend directly into the reservoir architecture and engineering fused with reverence. Dolavira shines as proof that Harappan order was not blind repetition. It was adaptable, intelligent. Each city tuned itself to its landscape like an instrument. In the desert, they became water engineers. On the coast, they became sailors. In the north, they became traders. And nowhere was their maritime brilliance more apparent than in Lothal, the port city. Here on the ancient Gulf of Combat, the Indus civilization met the sea. Lothal's dockyard, rectangular brick-lined, complete with spillways and sluices, still lies intact, its floor sloping gently toward where the tide once lapped. Ships from distant lands would have moored here, bringing tin timber pearls and stories from worlds beyond the horizon. Imagine the sound, the creak of ropes, the crash of waves, the voices of merchants haggling in a dozen tongues. In the warehouses beyond the docks, workers sort goods under the watch of overseers holding inscribed seals. Each seal bears a tiny image: a bull, a tiger, a unicorn, and a few lines of the still unknown Indus script. Every impression pressed into wet clay certifies authenticity like a signature or a trademark. The merchants of the Indus are early masters of bureaucracy. Their efficiency rivals that of empires yet unborn. From Lothal ships carry the civilization's reach outward to Oman, Bahrain, Mesopotamia. In the royal tombs of Urfar to the west, archaeologists will one day uncover Indus beads laid beside Sumerian queens. The world was already globalized before we had a word for it. Back inland, Harappa hums on, connected to this growing network of trade and thought. Its standardized weights, found everywhere, from Karachi to the Thar Desert, ensure fairness in commerce. A stone cube weighing exactly 13.7 grams in Harappa will match one in Lothal to within a fraction of a gram. It's an invisible social contract, a civilization's promise of honesty. And yet what's most remarkable about the Indus world is how little ego it reveals. No towering palaces, no heroic statues, no inscriptions boasting of victory or divine right. The people who built these cities seem content to let the work speak for itself. Order is their monument. Balance is their religion. As dusk falls, Harappa's streets glow with lamplight. Women sweep courtyards. Men lead their animals home. A boy releases a toy bull with rolling wheels, and it bumps gently down the lane before tipping over. He laughs, sets it upright again, and runs after it, an echo of every craftsman's joy in shaping motion from stillness. If the Indus civilization had a soul, it was built not of gold or stone, but of brick and water. Not the glamorous kind of engineering that makes emperors immortal, but the quiet, essential kind that makes cities livable. In this world of river and monsoon, balance is everything. Too little water and you starve. Too much and your city drowns. The Harappans did not pray for balance. They built it. From the high citadel of Mohenjo-Daro, one could look down and see geometry turned into life, brick-lined streets sloping gently toward the river, drains whispering beneath the city like arteries, wells rising from every courtyard like fountains of civilization. Even the smallest back alley is engineered, paved, graded, drained. Nothing about these cities feels accidental. Each decision is a conversation with nature spoken fluently in brick. The brick itself is a marvel. Each one fired at temperatures high enough to make it near immortal, cut in exact ratios and interchangeable from Harappa to Dolavira to Kalibangan. It is the most democratic building block ever made light enough for a laborer to carry, precise enough for an architect to trust. When a mason in Harappa lays a wall, he knows that a colleague hundreds of kilometers away is doing the same thing, brick for brick, line for line. Standardization becomes a kind of shared faith. Archaeologists will one day measure these bricks and realize the truth: the entire civilization was calibrated. Drainage channels, granary platforms, even city streets follow the same proportional logic. The Harappans might not have carved equations into stone, but their cities are full of math ratios, alignments, gradients, volumes, all intuitively understood and beautifully executed. It's engineering by instinct sustained over centuries. Water was their test and their triumph. In a land where rain can fall like wrath or vanish for months, they turned chaos into choreography. Wells dot every neighborhood, some public, some private, some so deep they pierce the ancient aquifers below. Each is lined with perfectly fitted brick rings, stacked with such precision that many still stand intact today, thousands of years later. A well for every household wasn't luxury. It was civic responsibility. When the bucket rose from the darkness, the water within it was already halfway purified, filtered through clay, brick, and time. The women who carried it home poured it across smooth platforms to wash grain, or into baked clay basins, where children splashed in the afternoon heat. Then as the water ran away, it never became waste. Every drop had a path from house to drain, from drain to sewer, from sewer to river. Nothing stagnated, nothing fouled. The Indus people had mastered what even modern cities often forget. Sanitation is not just cleanliness, it's civilization. In Dolavira, where water meant survival, engineering reached poetry. Imagine a city built in the desert, ringed by white salt plains that shimmer under the sun. Rain falls here only briefly, but the Harappans captured it all. 16 reservoirs surround the city like jewels, linked by stone channels and spillways that guide every runoff toward storage. From the citadel, staircases descend into vast basins carved into bedrock, their walls polished smooth to prevent seepage. You can still walk down those steps today, touch the same stone, and hear your footsteps echo across the empty cisterns. It's like standing inside a fossilized heartbeat. Further south in Lothal, the same genius bends to the rhythm of the sea. The dockyard there is an engineering paradox, massive yet delicate, able to hold ships at high tide and protect them when the water retreats. Bitumen lines the walls, spillways control overflow, and the floor slopes just enough to drain the basin without eroding it. The sea and the city exist in dialogue not combat. Even the tides are managed through design. It is in every sense an engineered peace treaty with nature. Back inland, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro perfect the art of drainage. Every lane has a gradient measured with uncanny precision. Stone covers are laid atop the channels to keep the air clean and the streets dry. Maintenance holes appear at intervals, early manholes for the first sanitation workers in history. You can imagine them moving through the city with baskets and long poles, clearing blockages, keeping the system alive. Their work was as vital as any ruler's decree, though no one carved their names. The materials that bound all this together, brick, lime, bitumen, tell their own story of chemistry. The Harappans knew that mixing lime with sand made mortar that hardened like stone, that bitumen sealed against water, that heating clay to just the right degree turned it from mud to permanence. They didn't theorize these things. They learned them through generations of attention. Their architecture is less about invention than observation, the scientific method written in dust and fire. And yet amid this precision, the cities never lose their human warmth. The engineers built for comfort as well as function. Narrow streets provide shade, courtyards channel breezes. Wells are placed where women can gossip while drawing water. Every public space has a purpose beyond utility. It is also a place for conversation, laughter, daily ritual. The Indus engineers were designing not monuments, but lives. As night falls over Mohenjo-Daro, the drains murmur softly beneath the brick. Somewhere a mason wipes his hands on a rag, satisfied that the new sewer section slopes just right, neither too steep to erode nor too shallow to stagnate. He doesn't know that his gradient will still be measurable 5,000 years later, that modern archaeologists will crouch over his handiwork and whisper in disbelief, "They got it right." Up above the great bath glows in lamplight. Workers pour fresh water through its inlet, watching it shimmer across the bitumen floor, before opening the outlet to drain it away. The entire system, fill cleanse, release is operated by hand, yet designed with the grace of clockwork. You can almost sense pride in their movements, the same pride that built every brick wall, every well, every channel. This civilization's temples were its plumbing, its cathedrals were its drains. The Indus people worshiped balance, the equilibrium between human and environment, city, and soil, water, and fire. Their religion, if we can call it that, was functionality elevated to beauty. When later cultures looked to the heavens for miracles, the Harappans looked beneath their feet. They found meaning in measurement, salvation in structure. And as their rivers shifted and their climate changed, they kept building, adjusting, learning. A civilization that could not control the monsoon learned instead to design with it, and that quiet wisdom sustained them for centuries. Among the many marvels of the Indus world, the gleaming brick cities, the faultless drains, the reservoirs cut from stone, none is more haunting than its silence. For all their sophistication, the people of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro left behind no readable word, no hymns, no royal decrees, no chronicles carved into palace walls. And yet they clearly wrote. Their symbols adorn thousands of objects, tiny, meticulous, and deliberate. They speak from every layer of soil, but in a language no one can yet answer. If you stood in the marketplace of Harappa around 2500 BC, you would see these messages everywhere. A merchant's stall might have small square seals, each about the size of a coin, carved from soft steatite and fired to pale gray stone. Their surfaces gleam faintly with polish, the edges beveled smooth. Across the top, a short line of symbols, maybe 4 or 5 at most, runs from right to left. Below the script, an animal stands, frozen in profile, a tiger, mid-stride, an elephant with curling trunk, a water buffalo, or most mysterious, of all the so-called unicorn, long-snouted, single-horned, part bull, part dream. No two seals are exactly the same. Each carries its owner's identity, part name, part emblem, perhaps part prayer. When pressed into soft clay, they leave an impression so crisp it could be mistaken for modern printing. These small works of art served as passport signatures or trademarks in a civilization that prized order over ornament. In a corner of the bazaar, a craftsman crouches over his workbench. He grips a narrow bronze chisel and leans toward a block of steatite, his breath held steady. With a dozen careful strokes, he engraves the curved horns of a bull, the slight tilt of its head, the precise flick of its tail. Each cut has purpose, each line meaning. He does not carve letters the way we understand them. He is sculpting identity, the mark of a trader, a family, a guild. In a few minutes, he will add symbols above the animal, a trident-like mark, a comb of vertical lines, perhaps a jar shape or a fish. To him, it is as clear as writing a name. To us, it is an unsolved equation. Over 4,000 of these inscriptions have been found from Harappa to Lothal, from Dolavira to distant trade outposts in Afghanistan. The same neat characters appear everywhere, always brief, always consistent. Some are scratched on pottery before firing, some painted, some inscribed on copper plates or ivory rods. They appear on weights, jewelry, amulets, and tools. Whatever they meant, they mattered. The inscriptions are too short for long speech, most fewer than 5 symbols, but they follow rules. Some signs prefer to stand at the beginning, others always at the end, as if grammar lurks beneath. There are even mirror versions of certain characters, flipped as though written by practiced scribes. Direction matters, nearly all read from right to left, though a few alternate lines switch direction like the path of an ox plowing a field. Scholars millennia later will peer through magnifying lenses and notice patterns that whisper of language. The symbols behave statistically, like real writing, with predictable repetition and rhythm. But whose language? Dravidian, early Indo-Aryan, something lost entirely. The debate fills libraries, yet the seals themselves keep their counsel serene as ever. To the Harappans, literacy might have been less about storytelling and more about certification. Each seal acts like a contract between maker and buyer, proof that goods are genuine and the transaction fair. In an age without signatures, a carved unicorn could carry the authority of a notarized stamp. Clay tags bearing these impressions have been found attached to bundles of goods, grain sacks, jars of oil, bales of cotton, identifying their owners as they traveled along river and sea routes. One might imagine a dockside clerk pressing a seal into wet clay, nodding in satisfaction as a boat departs for Mesopotamia. Even without decipherment, the art speaks volumes. The animal motifs are not random decoration. They're symbols of power and reverence. The bull's strength, the elephant's wisdom, the tiger's grace, all distilled into idealized forms. And then there is the unicorn, by far the most common. Its single horn curls delicately forward, often facing a ritual stand or vessel. Perhaps it's myth, perhaps metaphor, a spirit of fertility, trade, or divine favor. The Indus people seemed to favor symbols that blended realism and mystery, as if insisting that truth lies somewhere between. Sometimes beneath the carved animal, tiny geometric marks appear: circles, triangles, crosses, part ornament, part code. These embellishments may represent numbers, regions, or commodities. One seal might certify copper from Baluchistan, another the fine carnelian beads of Gujarat. In their compact beauty, the seals compress an entire bureaucracy into pocket size. But the script also wanders beyond commerce. At Mohenjo-Daro, a small copper tablet bears 4 neat symbols arranged like a nameplate. At Harappa, pot fragments carry signs daubed in black before firing as if labeling household goods. Even children's toys occasionally bear the script proof that writing, or at least its symbols, permeated daily life. Literacy here wasn't a privilege of priests. It was woven into the fabric of work and home alike. Picture the moment a trader receives a new seal. He tests it in soft clay, examines the crisp impression, then threads it with cord and hangs it from his neck. When he enters the market, buyers recognize his mark immediately. Reputation travels not through rumor, but through geometry, the curve of a line, the flick of a symbol. It's branding in the oldest sense identity through craft. We might smile at the thought that our modern logos and trademarks trace their ancestry to these ancient seals. Every company slogan, every monogrammed coin, every passport stamp carries the same ancestral logic: proof, trust, belonging. The Harappans perfected it before alphabets even existed. As twilight falls over the city, a seal carver locks away his chisels. Around him, the workshop's quiet, but the air still hums faintly with meaning. Hundreds of fresh seals rest on shelves, waiting to travel by cart to Harappa by boat, down the Indus, by sea, to far-off Sumer. In the glow of a clay lamp, the symbols seem almost alive, their shadows dancing on the wall, like tiny creatures trying to speak. We may never know what those signs meant. Were they prayers to gods, ledgers of trade, poems of ownership and order? Or were they simply the civilization's heartbeat written in shorthand? Whatever their secret, their endurance is remarkable. They survived not through conquest or translation, but through elegance. The Indus people carved meaning into silence, and that silence still holds. By the mid-3rd millennium BC, the Indus civilization had learned a truth that would define all great societies. After it, wealth does not come from what you make, but from how far your hands can reach. And the hands of the Harappans reached astonishingly far. From the lapis mines of Afghanistan to the pearl beds of Gujarat, from the copper hills of Rajasthan to the palaces of Sumer, the merchants of the Indus wove a network so vast and efficient that it pulsed like a living organism. Picture the morning light spilling across the docks of Lothal, the great port city on the Arabian Sea. The air smells of salt and clay and warm wood. The tide creeps into the brick-lined dockyard, an immense basin with precise spillways carved into its sides. Workers shout to one another as they load cargo-heavy bundles of grain baskets of cotton thread jars of sesame oil, sealed with the little clay impressions of their owners' seals. Nearby, a shipmaster, broad-shouldered, his beard dusted with salt, checks his manifest. He ties the seals onto ropes that will secure the cargo. Each impression bears a different animal and symbol: a unicorn, a bull, a pair of fish. Each represents a merchant, a promise of quality, a name without words. The Harappans have invented bureaucracy without paper trust, without kings. The vessel itself is small but sturdy, built of teak planks bound with coir rope, its hull smeared with bitumen to keep the sea out. It will follow the monsoon winds westward across the Arabian Sea to the coasts of Oman and Mesopotamia. There, it will trade Indus cotton and carnelian beads for tin silver, and perhaps a few stories about distant lands. When the tide turns, the ship will return laden with copper and dates its captain guiding by the stars that still shimmer above the same horizon. The Indus merchants are not conquerors. They are connectors. They speak the language of trade gestures, weights, seals, fairness. In their world, the sea is not a border, but a bridge. From the docks of Lothal goods flow inland along the arteries of the Indus River, their passage marked by standardized weights that guarantee honesty from port to marketplace. A cube of stone weighing precisely 13.7 grams in Gujarat, matches another found hundreds of kilometers away in Harappa. The decimal and binary systems already hum quietly beneath every transaction. Along the way, caravan routes wind through deserts and mountain passes. Traders lead donkeys laden with raw materials, copper from Baluchistan, lapis lazuli from Badakhshan, turquoise from Iran. They follow trails blazed by generations, stopping at oasis outposts that glitter faintly under the stars. At each stop, goods change hands, and so do ideas. Pottery styles shift subtly across regions, reflecting influence and adaptation. Even mathematics itself, fractions, standard measures, flows like a silent current through the hands of merchants and scribes. By the time goods reach the cities, they carry not just economic value, but cultural memory. A bead from Afghanistan might adorn the wrist of a girl in Harappa. A jar of sesame oil from the Indus may perfume a banquet in Ur. Every object is an ambassador. The commercial rhythm of the civilization depends on precision, on logistics, long before the word existed. At the edge of every major city stands a granary, its massive walls designed to store the lifeblood of the trade grain. Inside, rows of raised platforms hold sacks of wheat and barley. Air flows through channels beneath the floor to keep the harvest dry. Workers measure each sack with standard stones and record it with impressions of their seals. A miscount could ripple downriver and disrupt the balance of trade. The Harappans understood this intuitively. Their economy, like their drains, relied on flow. In the marketplaces of Mohenjo-Daro, that flow takes on a human face. The streets are lined with stalls, shaded by woven mats. Traders call out prices, children chase stray goats through the dust, and the air smells of roasting grain and hot metal. There are no coins. Money is measured in weight, not minted. A merchant lays his stone cubes on a balanced nods and completes a sale. There is dignity in the transaction, a kind of quiet equality. Buyer and seller alike submit to the same weight, the same law. It's easy to imagine that a civilization so vast must have been ruled by kings, but the Harappans seem to have preferred administrators to monarchs. Theirs is an economy without arrogance. The seals and weights serve in place of signatures and thrones. Order replaces authority. The merchant class is not an underling to a royal elite, it is the elite. Their city-states hum, not with conquest, but with accounting. At the height of the trading season, the Indus River itself becomes a liquid highway. Hundreds of small boats, rafts of bundled reeds, wooden barges, flat-bottomed skiffs move up and down the channels loaded with goods. From Harappa to the sea is nearly 1,000 kilometers, but the journey is steady and safe. Along the bank's rest, stops offer mooring points and markets. Fishers haul in their catch beside them. Farmers unload new harvests. Every settlement feeds the next. Every exchange greases the system. The river does not just carry cargo, it carries civilization. And beyond across the ocean, the Indus leaves its fingerprint in foreign lands. In Mesopotamia, Sumerian scribes mention a distant place called Meluha, a land of blackwood ivory and brilliant stones. The merchants of Meluha, they say, arrive in their own ships and speak a strange tongue. Their cargo is marked with unfamiliar symbols. Archaeologists will one day find those same seals buried in Mesopotamian soil, proof that the Indus world and the cradle of Sumer once clasped hands across the sea. Back home, the flow of wealth sustains more than trade it funds beauty. Workshops flourish in every city. Jewelers cut agate into translucent beads, their edges fine as dew. Artisans polish shell bangles until they gleam. Metalworkers shape bronze into tiny figurines, such as the famous dancing girl, whose confident pose will astonish modern eyes. These luxuries are not frivolities. They are the signature of prosperity. When a civilization can afford art, it has achieved stability. The merchant's life is not without peril. Storms can shatter ships. Floods can drown caravans. Yet unlike the empires that thrive on warfare, the Indus people respond to disaster not with conquest, but with adaptation. When rivers change course, they build new ports. When rains fail, they adjust their crops. Trade, not triumph, is their philosophy, a faith in the constant exchange between people and environment. At sunset, in Lothal, the tide retreats, leaving the dock basin calm as glass. Workers sweep the quayside ceiling warehouses for the night. A young scribe presses a seal into soft clay to mark the final shipment of the day, one jar of carnelian beads bound for the west. He sets the clay aside to dry, unaware that it will one day lie in a museum case, still bearing the impression of his hand. The hum of the Indus world was not the clash of swords or the chants of priests. It was the steady, industrious rhythm of tools. Chisels against stone, wheels turning, beads clicking against one another. This was a civilization that worshipped creation itself, the art of making. While the great temples of Egypt echoed with hymns and the palaces of Sumer glittered with kings, the Indus cities thrummed with workshops where thousands of anonymous hands shaped the future. Walk through the narrow streets of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa at midday, and you'll feel that hum everywhere. The air vibrates with the sound of production metal, clay shell stone textile, all being transformed from raw matter into beauty and utility. Smoke rises from the potter's kilns, and the smell of burning wood mingles with that of baked earth. Somewhere nearby, the faint metallic ring of a hammer on copper punctuates the day steady as a heartbeat. Here in these simple workshops lies the real genius of the Indus. Every neighborhood has its craft potters on one lane, bead makers on another, metal workers near the river for easy cooling water. The system is decentralized but perfectly synchronized, each craftsman a note in a larger harmony. No palace oversees them, no overseer barks orders. And yet the rhythm holds. Inside one courtyard, a group of women sit cross-legged on mats, weaving cotton thread. Their fingers move with such speed, it's almost invisible, drawing fiber through spindles, tightening it into fine strands. Cotton was born here in the Indus plains long before the rest of the world even knew the plant existed. When later empires boast of silk and linen, remember that the Harappans were already wearing soft, breathable cotton 4,000 years before Christ. The cloth they weave will travel far, wrapped around traders in Lothal, carried aboard ships to the Persian Gulf, perhaps even draped on a Sumerian noble who will never know its origin. Next door, the potter's wheels spin low and rhythmic. Clay turns to form under wet hands, rising into jars, bowls, and storage pots. The designs are geometric lines, circles, triangles, each pattern repeating across the cities, suggesting shared aesthetic laws. Some pots are polished to a dark sheen, others painted with black slip and fired to deep red. Many bear motifs of fish or peacock symbols that might have meant fertility water or simply beauty. The potters don't speak their philosophy aloud, but it's there in every curve. Form follows function, and function becomes art. Across the street, the bead makers work in near silence. It's delicate business, requiring patience bordering on devotion. They heat agate and carnelian stones in small furnaces, then plunge them into cold water, a process that deepens their color to a rich inner fire. Once cooled, they grind the stones into cylinders, polish them smooth, and drill a hole through the center using a tiny bow drill tipped with flint. One bead can take hours. 10 can take days. But when strung together, they shimmer like captured sunsets. These beads are the currency of elegance throughout the ancient world. Mesopotamian queens will one day wear them. Egyptian traders will covet them. They carry not just beauty, but the memory of the artisans who touched them, the steady hands, the quiet focus, the satisfaction of perfection. In another part of town, the shell workers shape ornaments from the curved white interiors of conch shells imported from the Arabian Sea. The sound of their craft is almost musical, a faint scraping rhythm as they carve bangles, combs, and tiny figurines. The shell glints in the light, its surface so smooth it looks wet. Bangles made here will adorn wrists from Harappa to Dolavira, symbols of grace, prosperity, and perhaps protection. And in the foundries where the air is thick with smoke and heat, metal sings its own song. Copper and tin melt together in crucibles, becoming bronze the perfect alloy for tools and art alike. The glow from the furnaces paints every face orange. Hammers strike, sparks leap, and the room fills with the roar of progress. Here is where the Harappan metallurgists truly earn their quiet immortality. Their tools, chisels, saws, needles are crafted with uncanny precision. The bronze statues they leave behind are small but exquisite, like the famous dancing girl of Mohenjo-Daro. Barefoot, hips cocked, one hand on her waist, she embodies a civilization utterly at ease with itself. There is humor in her pose, confidence in her gaze. She's not a goddess or a queen, just a girl mid-gesture, humanity captured in molten metal. In these workshops, art and labor blur into one. There are no signatures, no personal glory. The beauty of the Indus is collective, anonymous. Each craftsman builds upon the work of others, perfecting methods, refining tools, discovering new materials. Innovation here isn't shouted, it's shared. And it's not only luxury goods. Everyday tools are designed with the same care. Terracotta toys, bull carts, miniature houses, animals on wheels scatter across the city's streets, proof that even play was part of life's design. Children roll their clay animals through puddles while their parents weigh goods on standardized scales. A civilization that engineers joy is one that understands longevity. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Harappan craft industry is its scale. Excavations reveal entire districts devoted to single trades with rows of furnaces, supply yards, and waste pits. Bead makers worked in assembly lines, each specializing in one stage: cutting, drilling, polishing. The resemblance to modern production is uncanny. They even used templates for uniformity. In a sense, the Indus cities were the world's first industrial zones, without smokestacks or slaves, but with remarkable efficiency. At dusk, when the workshops cool, families gather on the rooftops to rest. The day's labor has left their hands stained with clay and soot, but their spirits are light. Someone brings a small drum. Someone else starts to sing. The same hands that carved stone and spun cotton now tap out rhythms against pottery jars, laughter spilling across the rooftops. Below, the kilns still glow, keeping the city warm through the night. As stars rise over the Indus plain, you can almost sense the city itself, breathing a vast collective workshop that never truly sleeps. Every home, every street corner, every artisan adds another heartbeat to the whole. These were not people who sought immortality in conquest or monuments. Their legacy lay in the perfection of the ordinary. They turned labor into art and art into order. When you look at their beads, their pots, their tools, you're not just seeing objects. You're seeing the philosophy of a civilization that believed in doing small things so well that they'd outlast empires. And they did. Long after their cities fell silent, the things they made kept speaking in the shimmer of a bead, the curve of a pot, the balance of a weight. The Indus people didn't carve their names into stone, they baked them into eternity. Morning in an Indus city begins softly. The light filters through a haze of dust and cooking smoke, washing the brick streets in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere, a conch shell sounds from a rooftop, a daily call, not to prayer, but to wakefulness. The city stirs. Doors creak open. Footsteps echo in the narrow lanes. Life measured and ordinary begins its ancient routine. A woman steps out into the courtyard of her home, balancing a clay jar on one hip. She lowers it to the well, the rope creaking as it unwinds into the cool dark. The splash below is gentle but deep, a sound every child here knows from birth. She draws the jar up water, glistening on her arms, and pours a little over the flagstones to settle the dust. The air smells faintly of sesame oil wood smoke and river mist. Across the street, a man crouches by the drain, scraping silt from its cover with a flat stick. He isn't a servant or a slave. There are none here, but a citizen maintaining his own system, part of the unspoken contract that keeps the city breathing. Even in this humble task, there's pride. Cleanliness is not a chore, it's identity. Children begin to appear wild-haired and half-dressed, chasing each other through the alleys. One drags a toy bull cart made of clay, its wheels squeaking softly. Another carries a small whistle shaped like a bird, which chirps when he blows into it. These toys, simple, joyful, have been found across every Indus site still intact after 5 millennia. They are the laughter of eternity. The market wakes next. Under awnings made of woven reeds, traders arrange their goods in perfect little displays: beads, pots, bangles, dried fish, sesame cakes. A woman in a red shawl tests a length of cotton between her fingers. 2 men haggle over a copper blade, tapping its edge against stone to prove its worth. A potter's apprentice runs past, carrying a tray of freshly painted bowls, careful not to trip. Above it all, the air buzzes with conversation, with the sound of civilization at its most human commerce without conquest. The rhythm of the city feels effortless, but every gesture is supported by systems invisible to the eye. Water flows through hidden channels. Waste disappears through covered drains. Storage jars sit cool in underground pits. Life is orderly without being rigid, communal without being crowded. Each home has privacy, but also access to water, to light, to community. The city works because everyone from artisan to merchant understands their role in its balance. Inside a modest home, a family gathers for breakfast. Flat cakes of barley and millet cook on a clay griddle while the mother spoons lentil stew from an earthen pot. A child sits beside her, tracing finger patterns into the dust geometric designs that echo the ones on painted jars. Through the open courtyard, sunlight drapes across the wall, and a gentle breeze carries the sound of distant hammering from the workshops. There's no sense of rush, only rhythm. The day unfolds according to the sun: morning for labor, midday for rest, evening for talk. By the river, farmers tend small plots of lentils and chickpeas, their reflections rippling in the flooded fields. Herds of zebu cattle move slowly under the watch of boys armed with sticks. The animals snort their humps, swaying like slow metronomes. Beyond the fields, the river glitters, always there, the silent overseer of all things. As the heat builds, the city slows. Shops close their shutters. People retreat indoors to shaded courtyards. From the upper floors, women hang damp cloths across doorways to cool the air. Somewhere, a loom clacks steadily, a sound of patience, not urgency. In the workshops, the fires are left to die down for the midday break. A bead maker wipes his brow, examining the tiny carnelian cylinder he's drilled all morning. He holds it to the light and smiles. Perfect. Next to him, an apprentice naps head, resting on his knees, the scent of heated stone still in the air. Even the animals rest. Pariah dogs curl up in the shade of walls. Donkeys doze beside carts loaded with goods for tomorrow's market. The city hums in low suspension, like a heartbeat between pulses. Then as the sun begins to fall, everything awakens again. Women sweep their courtyards, men return from fields, and children splash in the water, drawn fresh from the wells. Laughter begins to rise like music. A potter turns his wheel one last time before dinner, shaping a small lamp, simple round, with a single spout for oil. These lamps will light every street tonight, the glow soft, and even the shadows long and warm. In the evening, the rooftops come alive. Families climb the steps with food and cushions, escaping the heat of the earth. From up there, they can see the whole city breathing the grid of streets, glowing like embers, the flicker of lamps reflected in polished brick. Somewhere in the distance, a musician plucks a lyre made of gut strings, its tone soft and melancholy. Neighbors call to each other across the rooftops. Someone tells a story about a flooded river or a mischievous spirit who hides children's sandals. There is laughter, always laughter. Dinner is shared, simply bread lentils, onions, perhaps a handful of dates. People eat from the same dish, talking about the day's trade or tomorrow's plans. In wealthier homes, copper cups gleam beside ceramic plates, but even the poorest share in the same comfort of community. No one dines alone. Farther down in the lower town, the scent of clay and ash lingers as ovens bake the next day's bread. The night is warm, the stars scattered bright above the plains. A few travelers arrive late, leading oxen loaded with grain or pottery, and are welcomed by the city's innkeepers, proof that hospitality was as much a civic duty as clean drains. When dawn breaks over the Indus plains, it finds a civilization already in motion, but it does not find temples. There are no towering ziggurats, no colossal statues gazing sternly down from marble altars. No inscriptions proclaim the triumphs of gods or kings. And yet faith is everywhere in the water that glistens in the wells, in the hands that press clay into shape, in the rhythm of life that repeats with quiet devotion. The Indus people believed not through spectacle, but through practice. Their religion, if we can call it that, was woven into the fabric of the ordinary. It begins, as always, with water. The great bath of Mohenjo-Daro, shimmering in the early light, remains the closest thing we have to a temple. Wide stone steps descend into its clear basin. Around its edge, small alcoves hold lamps or offerings now long vanished. The air smells faintly of baked brick and damp bitumen. In this calm space, you can almost feel the ceremony that once filled it. People stepping down, in silence, the water cool around their ankles. A pause, a breath, a cleansing. No idols, no priests, no incense, just the act itself. Purity by immersion, renewal by water. It was faith as function belief through hygiene. To bathe was to participate in order to keep one's body in harmony with the city's own cleanliness. Later, civilizations would codify these instincts into rituals. Hindu ablutions, Buddhist baths, Islamic wudu. But here in the Indus, the idea is still innocent, unspoken, perfectly human. In homes across the city, miniature altars echo the same reverence. Small raised platforms, often beside bathing areas, hold offerings of grain or flowers. In one house, archaeologists discovered a terracotta figurine of a woman with elaborate headdress and wide hips, the so-called mother goddess. She is not fearsome or remote. She is domestic intimate. Her body curves with fertility, her face serene. She represents not domination, but continuity, the same force that makes crops grow, rivers flow, and families endure. Other figures show bearded men, seated in yogic posture, eyes half closed, surrounded by animals. Scholars have called him the Proto-Shiva, or lord of beasts, but he might just as easily be a shepherd's god, a guardian of the wilderness, or an image of meditation itself. Whatever his name, he reflects a philosophy rather than a theology power through stillness, mastery through balance. The same ideals that guide the Indus engineer also shape the Indus mystic. Sacred animals wander through their iconography like quiet companions: the bull, the elephant, the rhinoceros, the tiger, each carved carefully on seals, each perhaps a symbol of virtue or lineage. The bull embodies strength and patience, the elephant wisdom and memory, the tiger courage. And then, of course, the unicorn, the most mysterious of all. Was it a god? A clan emblem? A dream made solid in stone? Whatever it was, it mattered enough to stamp on thousands of seals. Even fire had its place. At Kalibangan, archaeologists uncovered rows of brick altars blackened with ash, clear signs of controlled flames. Offerings may have been made here, not to a sky father demanding sacrifice, but as part of cyclical rituals of renewal, light for warmth, smoke for cleansing, flame for transformation. Fire and water, two opposites that together defined the sacred geometry of Harappan life. But the Indus faith was not confined to shrines. It infused their entire landscape. The cities themselves seem built according to principles that border on the spiritual cardinal alignment proportional design balance between high citadel and low town. Their urban planning feels almost liturgical, as if architecture itself were an act of worship. To build straight was to honor the cosmos. To drain properly was to respect purity. To measure accurately was to mirror divine order. There's a quiet theology in that precision, a belief that harmony in the human world reflects harmony in the natural one. The Indus people needed no thunderous gods to tell them this. The monsoon did it every year. When the rains came, the rivers swelled the soil, revived, and the cycle renewed itself. Divinity was seasonal, not celestial. Salvation came with the flood. Even their burial practices reflect restraint. The dead were laid in simple north-south graves, bodies wrapped and placed with modest offerings, beads pottery, a shell bangle, sometimes food. No pyramids, no tombs, no golden masks. Death for the Indus people was a return to the soil, not an escape from it. The absence of grandeur suggests not indifference, but acceptance, a confidence that the same order governing rivers and drains also governs life and death. And yet there are hints of transcendence in the smallest details. The seals often depict a sacred tree, perhaps a people, with figures kneeling beneath it. The tree's spreading branches echo the heavens. Its roots plunge into the underworld. It binds sky, earth, and water, the entire Indus cosmos, in one living symbol. Beneath its leaves, a worshipper kneels, arms raised not in fear, but gratitude. This gratitude is the key to understanding their spirituality. In a world as volatile as the Indus Basin, with its unpredictable floods, shifting rivers, and fragile crops, faith could not rely on permanence. It had to rely on equilibrium. Their religion was not about commanding nature, but cooperating with it. Every act of daily life, watering a field, cleaning a drain, drawing from a well, became a small act of reverence. There's a kind of understated wisdom in that. While later civilizations built monuments that shouted to eternity, the Indus built systems that worked. They chose sustainability over spectacle, humility over hubris. And perhaps that's why their legacy still glimmers in the cultures that followed. The bathing rituals of India, the fertility symbols of folk art, the reverence for rivers and sacred trees, all are distant echoes of this ancient unspoken faith. As dusk falls, the great bath glows with lamplight. A few figures descend the steps, their movements slow, unhurried. The water catches the flicker of the flames, scattering gold ripples across the walls. From somewhere nearby drifts the faint scent of burning ghee, the hiss of fire offering smoke to the night sky. Above the stars appear one by one old patient witnesses to the same rituals repeated for centuries. There are no priests here, no choirs, no idols. Only the eternal conversation between water, fire, and sky, between people and the world they have learned to trust. If you wander through the ruins of Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, today you'll notice something strange, something that isn't there. No palace dominates the skyline. No throne has been found. No statue of a king. No monument carved to boast of conquest or divine right. The streets are too rational, the buildings too democratic, the scale too human. Yet this was a civilization of hundreds of cities and millions of people spread over an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. How then did they keep it all together? This is the great paradox of the Indus world order, without autocracy, harmony without hierarchy. While other ancient civilizations ruled through spectacle pharaohs, claiming to be gods, kings, proclaiming law on stone tablets, the Indus preferred silence and system. They governed not by decree, but by design. Stand at a street corner in Mohenjo-Daro. The bricks beneath your feet are identical to those in Harappa, Dolavira, and Kalibangan. The streets here follow the same grid as cities hundreds of kilometers away. The drainage angles, the well designs, the weights, and measures all standardized. That's not coincidence, it's coordination. Someone or something was keeping the blueprint consistent. But it wasn't a king. There are no royal seals, no palatial compounds, no buried treasures hoarded by elites. Instead, power seems to have been civic communal, perhaps even bureaucratic. Picture a council of merchants, artisans, and elders meeting in the shade of a brick hall. They don't wear crowns. They wear simple linen and copper bangles, their authority resting not on divine favor, but on competence. In their hands, clay tablets marked with seal impressions the city's ledgers, its trade records, its grain accounts. Decisions are made not with fanfare, but with quiet deliberation. The Indus may have invented the committee long before anyone thought to complain about meetings. Every system they built, from urban layouts to irrigation channels, reflects the same principle: shared standards, collective discipline. Even their bricks obeyed civic regulation. The famous 1:4 ratio wasn't a stylistic choice, it was policy. Imagine the logistics required to maintain such uniformity across thousands of square kilometers, training, inspection, enforcement, all without a single word of legislation surviving. It suggests not chaos, but consensus. Archaeologists once searched eagerly for evidence of rulers' palaces, weapons, mass graves, something to fit the familiar narrative of ancient power. What they found instead were seals of trade, public baths, and grain stores. The Indus people seem to have valued administration over domination. Their government might have looked less like a monarchy and more like a municipal board, a civilization of planners and clerks rather than generals. Even their granaries tell the story. At Harappa, enormous storage complexes rise on raised platforms, ventilated with air ducts to keep grain dry. The design implies oversight, auditing, redistribution. But the grain wasn't hoarded in royal vaults. It was public used to feed laborers, support trade, and stabilize famine years. This wasn't wealth as power. It was wealth as management. The same logic flows through their cities. Each district has its own well, its own drain, its own access to sanitation. There's no evidence of elite-only quarters or segregated ghettos. Houses vary in size, but not extravagantly. The difference between rich and poor seems measured in bricks, not in humiliation. It's a society of balance and equality, yes, but not exploitation. Perhaps that's the secret: cooperation instead of coercion. The Indus cities were too interdependent to thrive on tyranny. Merchants needed potters, potters needed farmers, farmers needed smiths, and everyone needed water. Control over such a vast, varied region likely rested on shared incentives, trade routes, flood management, agricultural success. Their politics was hydraulic and economic before it was ideological. It's tempting to call this proto-democracy, but that would be an anachronism. It's more accurate to say they achieved systemic harmony, the rare equilibrium between individual work and collective benefit. Each citizen's duty-keeping drains clean. Maintaining wells, building walls, doubled as civic participation. The city was the state, and every home its organ. You can imagine the rhythm of administration. Scribes marking tallies in wet clay. Overseers checking the slope of new drainage channels. Inspectors weighing goods at the market to ensure fairness. It's bureaucracy at its most elegant, transparent, standardized, consistent. The Indus had no emperor's edicts, but they had rules, and the rules worked. And while their neighbors waged wars, the Indus people waged peace. There are few weapons among their ruins, no great arsenals, no fortresses bristling with defense. Their city walls served more as flood barriers than battlements. Even the blades and arrowheads found are mostly utilitarian tools, repurposed for defense, if needed, not instruments of aggression. Peace here seems not naive, but deliberate, a strategy of survival in a world that rewarded cooperation over conquest. Their restraint might have been cultural, even spiritual. A civilization that saw divinity in balance would naturally distrust extremes. The same principle that guided their drainage and measurements likely guided their politics: moderation. Keep things level. Let the water flow. Of course, every system hides its flaws. Not everyone would have agreed, not every city obeyed perfectly. Yet for nearly 700 years, this equilibrium held a miracle by any measure. While other Bronze Age powers rose and fell in cycles of glory and ruin, the Indus world endured through quiet stability. No wars recorded, no dynasties toppled, no golden ages to brag about, just centuries of steady collective competence. At dusk, the city returns to calm. The council hall empties. Clerks roll up their seals. Merchants close their stalls, and farmers return from the fields. The lights flicker in the courtyards, reflecting off wet brick after the evening's water rituals. The civilization's machinery hums beneath it, all unseen, but precise, as dependable as the monsoon. From the citadel, one can look out across the darkening rooftops and see what true order looks like, not the order of fear or hierarchy, but the order of agreement. No ruler's voice commands it, no army enforces it. The city simply functions because everyone expects it to. Every great civilization leaves behind its scars, swords, fortresses, battlefields, and the brittle pride of victory carved in stone. But the Indus Valley curiously left almost none. No murals of warriors, no royal armies parading through triumphal gates, no skeletons pierced by bronze weapons. For centuries, archaeologists have sifted through its ruins, expecting to find some hint of violence, and instead they find drains, toys, and storage jars. It's as if the Indus world managed the impossible, a civilization without war, or perhaps one that hid its conflicts too well. Walk along the outer walls of Harappa. They rise tall and thick, built of millions of uniform bricks. At first glance, they look like fortifications, strong, imposing, the kind of wall meant to repel invasion. But look closer, and you'll notice they don't guard gates or towers. Their alignment follows the floodplain, not a battlefield. The walls are flood barriers, not ramparts. They're defenses against the river, not against men. The Harappans, it seems, were less afraid of armies than of nature. Inside those walls, there are no barracks, no weapon caches. The few weapons we do find, bronze knives, small spears, slingshots, are mostly tools repurposed for hunting or ceremony. The Indus artisans could have made swords. They had the technology, the metal, the precision. But they didn't. They poured their bronze into saws, drills, needles, and ornaments instead. It's an astonishing choice. While Mesopotamia fortified itself with city-states locked in constant warfare, and Egypt armed itself with chariots and composite bows, the Indus people quietly chose peace. They built sewers instead of armories, workshops instead of prisons. The archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler once called Mohenjo-Daro a city without kings and without soldiers, a remark half in wonder, half in disbelief. After all, how could such order exist without fear? Perhaps the answer lies in their worldview. The Indus civilization didn't exalt conquest, it exalted balance. To them, chaos wasn't an invading army. It was a flood, a drought, a broken drain. Their survival depended on cooperation with each other and with nature. So their engineers became generals, their masons, the strategists of stability. The city plan was their fortress. Precision was their defense. And yet peace is rarely absolute. Beneath the serenity of their cities, faint shadows linger. In the later layers of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists found several skeletons scattered in streets and doorways, their postures unnatural, as if they had fallen suddenly. Some early scholars rushed to declare them victims of invasion, the massacre that ended the Indus civilization, they said. It was a dramatic theory, an Aryan army sweeping down from the north cities, burning rivers, running red. But time and better evidence have largely dissolved that story. The skeletons date to different periods, their positions random, their cause of death unknown. There are no burn layers, no weapons, no signs of sacking. The cities declined slowly, not violently. These people likely died from disease, famine, or flood, not from war. The myth of invasion became one more ghost in the long twilight of the Indus. Still, peace itself can be a kind of illusion. The walls might not have been built for war, but they were built for protection from nature, yes, but also from uncertainty. A civilization that depends on the monsoon lives forever at the mercy of change. A delayed rain, a shifting river, a failed crop, each could tear apart the fragile equilibrium they worked so hard to build. The Indus people's real enemy was instability, and they fought it with architecture discipline and faith in routine. Imagine a storm season in Mohenjo-Daro. The river swells beyond its banks. Rain hammers the roofs. The air turns thick with silt and fear. But the city holds. The streets angled for drainage carry away the water. The sewers run full. The wells overflow. And the great bath symbol of purity becomes a symbol of endurance. Here, order itself is a weapon. The Harappans understood something most empires never do, that power isn't control, it's resilience. They built redundancy into everything. Wells every few meters, so no one could be cut off. Multiple reservoirs, in case one ran dry. Houses arranged for mutual shade, not isolation. Even their trade networks worked as insurance. When one route failed, another opened. Theirs was a peace maintained not by armies, but by systems, a civilization held together, by design rather than domination. And yet no peace is perfect. Somewhere in those long centuries, tensions must have simmered. Cities competed quietly for trade, artisans guarded their craft secrets. Farmers argued over water rights. There were no wars of conquest, but there may have been wars of survival, fought not with blades, but with endurance and adaptation. Their restraint is all the more remarkable when viewed in context. Around 2300 BC, Sargon of Akkad forged the world's first empire through brutal conquest. Egypt built its pyramids on the backs of thousands of laborers under the whip. In contrast, the Indus civilization spread farther and lasted longer, without armies, without slaves, without tyranny. It's almost unsettling, as if they had solved the problem of human cooperation too well. But peace, even the most sophisticated kind, has a price. A society that perfects stability risks becoming dependent on it. When the climate began to shift and the rivers changed course, the Harappans, so skilled at order, may have struggled to adapt to chaos. In time, their great cities would empty quietly, not from invasion, but from erosion of soil, of water, of certainty. For now, though, in this golden moment of 2000 BC, their peace holds. The streets are clean. The wells are full. Children play by the riverbanks under the watchful eyes of their parents. There are no banners flying, no soldiers patrolling, no fear humming beneath the surface. Only the low murmur of civilization at equilibrium. By now, the Indus world has perfected the art of staying alive in places where survival should have been impossible. From the flooded plains of the north to the sun-cracked deserts of Gujarat, they have turned nature's extremes into a laboratory for human ingenuity. If Mesopotamia gave us kings and Egypt gave us gods, the Indus gave us engineers anonymous, tireless, and astonishingly ahead of their time. Imagine standing in the city of Dolavira, where the air shimmers with heat and the horizon flickers with salt. No rivers here, no lush fields, just stone dust and mirage. Yet beneath your feet runs one of the most advanced water systems the ancient world would ever see. Great channels cut through the bedrock, leading into rectangular reservoirs carved with geometric precision. When the monsoon comes rare, but fierce water rushes through these channels, captured, stored, and rationed for the long, dry months ahead. Each reservoir feeds the next through a network of sluices and spillways, their walls so well fitted that they still hold water today. This is not luck. This is science. The people of Dolavira measured rainfall, mapped runoff, and calculated gradients without writing a single equation. Their instruments were the land itself. Their reward was endurance. Back in the fertile heartland, the same intelligence takes gentler form. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa thrive because their engineers know how to make the river both ally and servant. Every street, every courtyard, every brick is placed with purpose. The slope of the streets is no accident. It follows the subtle tilt of the floodplain, allowing rainwater to flow naturally into covered drains. Those drains, in turn, lead to central channels that carry waste away from living areas and into settling pits outside the city. Even the manholes, yes, manholes, are spaced at perfect intervals, allowing maintenance without excavation. 5,000 years ago, they designed a sanitation grid modern cities still struggle to imitate. But the Indus engineers didn't stop with sewers and storage. They invented standardization itself, the language of measurement. Across every site, from the smallest village to the grandest city, weights and measures align perfectly. Cubes of chert and limestone form a decimal system of weights, each one precisely double or half of the next. 0.85 grams, 1.7 grams, 3.4, 6.8, 13.7, and so on. These were not mere counters. They were guarantees, units of fairness that made trade possible, law tangible, and cooperation effortless. A potter in Lothal could sell jars to a merchant in Harappa and know that his one weight was the same everywhere. That kind of trust, mathematical trust, is civilization itself. And it came not from divine decree, but from human consensus. Even their tools reveal a level of precision that feels almost eerie. Drill bits made of flint so fine They could pierce beads of carnelian with holes smaller than a thread. Copper saws that could cut through shell and stone without warping. Scales balanced so perfectly that a modern jeweler might still envy them. The Harappans were not guessing. They were experimenting. They understood friction leverage temperature and proportion not as theories, but as habits. And all of it, every bit of it, was built to last. Their bricks fired at high temperatures and uniform in ratio could survive centuries of monsoon. Their wells were reinforced with concentric brick rings to prevent collapse. Even their woodwork, rare in this arid land, was preserved by bitumen, coating a waterproof resin imported from distant valleys. Theirs was a sustainability, not of ideology, but of necessity. In Lothal by the sea, engineering becomes art. The dockyard there is no simple basin. It's a marvel of hydrology. Measuring 218 meters long and 37 wide, it was designed to fill with seawater at high tide and drain at low, using a system of sluices that prevented silt from choking the entrance. No ancient people had ever built something like it before. No one would again for millennia. Picture it at dawn, ships moored along the dock, their hulls creaking as workers unload timber, copper ingots, jars of sesame oil. Overseers stand on the quay, using rope plumb lines to check that the water's flow remains steady. Each adjustment of a sluice gate, each repair to a retaining wall, is an act of science disguised as routine. What's extraordinary about the Indus engineers is not just what they built, but how quietly they built it. Their technology is everywhere, but their pride is nowhere. There are no inscriptions boasting of who designed the Great Bath or who carved the first reservoir. They didn't carve their equations in stone, they poured them into brick. Their legacy is functional, not monumental. Even their city layouts seem to reflect a kind of philosophical geometry. Streets run north-south and east-west, echoing the movement of the sun and the flow of the river. The citadels are raised on massive platforms, equal parts architecture and flood insurance. Storage areas align with wind direction for natural ventilation. Wells appear with uncanny regularity, spaced like heartbeat intervals across the urban landscape. The entire civilization feels engineered toward balance, as if guided by an invisible blueprint of harmony. And beneath it all hums their greatest technology adaptation. When rivers shifted course, they moved with them. When the monsoon grew fickle, they dug deeper wells. When new materials appeared, bronze, shellstone, they folded them seamlessly into their systems. Their science was not a rigid doctrine, it was a living process. Even their art reveals this practical intelligence. Beads drilled so symmetrically they could have been made by machine. Terracotta figures fired at precisely the right temperature to retain color. Pottery painted with repeating fractal-like patterns, spirals, grids, trees that mirror the same mathematical sense found in their city plans. Beauty here was geometry made visible. At sunset, a group of masons finishes work on a new wall near the citadel. They test the gradient by pouring water from a jar, watching how it flows along the bricks. When the stream runs straight, they nod in satisfaction. Around them, children play with miniature carts in the dust, mimicking their elders' tiny engineers in training. Later, under the night sky, the city glows faintly with lamplight. From above, it would look like a circuit board, each well, each street, each drain connected to the next. It hums silent but alive, a machine built not of metal, but of cooperation. The Indus people never separated science from life. To them, engineering wasn't a specialty, it was a worldview. The same mind that built a sewer also designed a bead, a pot, a dockyard. They understood instinctively that civilization is a kind of experiment to keep water flowing, to keep people clean, to keep the world in balance for just one more generation. and for nearly 1,000 years they succeeded. Their cities stood through flood and famine, their systems self-repairing, their innovations unboasted yet unsurpassed. Even when their words fell silent, their structures kept speaking in brick, in measurement, in the echo of flowing drains beneath the earth. At first, no one notices. The Indus still flows, the markets still hum, the wells still fill with cool, silvery water. The monsoon arrives, as it always has, late perhaps, but faithful. And yet something in the rhythm of the world has begun to shift. The sky lingers longer between rains. The soil cracks sooner after harvest. The breeze that once smelled of wet earth now carries dust. It is slow, imperceptible, and relentless, the kind of change that can hollow out a civilization before it realizes it is dying. Around 2000 BC, the Indus people face an enemy they cannot see: the climate itself. The monsoon weakens. The great rivers begin to wander, like restless serpents abandoning their old beds, carving new paths. Floodplains that once gleamed green with barley and wheat turn pale. Wells deepen, year by year, their water harder, saltier. The farmers look up to the sky, waiting for clouds that never quite arrive. In Dolavira, the great desert city of engineers, the reservoirs stand half empty. Their stone walls still hold, but their mirrors no longer shimmer. The air tastes of salt from the encroaching ran of Kutch. Men walk across the cracked basins, tracing the outlines of water long gone. They keep the faith of maintenance, scraping silt, repairing spillways, adjusting gates, as if work alone could summon rain. But the monsoon is not a mechanism. It is a god gone silent. Far to the north in Harappa, the Ravi River begins to abandon its city. Once a lifeline, it now drifts eastward, changing course, leaving behind mudflats where fish once glimmered. The fields dry. Canals clog with dust. Farmers try to follow the retreating water, shifting their villages toward the wetter lands of the Ganges plain. They carry with them the habits of centuries, brick ratios, beads weights, and faith in order. But the soil there is different. The rains uncertain, the rhythm broken. The decline is not sudden. There is no apocalypse, no invasion, no single day when everything ends. The Indus civilization unravels slowly, gracefully, almost politely, like an old garment fraying at the seams. Trade weakens first. The great ships of Lothal set sail less often. The dock fills with silt. The lapis and copper caravans stop coming from the mountains. The seals once stamped daily onto wet clay gather dust. Merchants wait at the quays for boats that never return. Inside the cities, the signs are quieter but no less tragic. Wells run dry and are dug deeper sometimes through older ruins. Houses shrink in size. Upper floors collapse and are not rebuilt. The great granaries stand empty, their air ducts clogged. Kilns fall cold. The potters still make their red ware, but it loses its precision, the lines less crisp, the shapes less symmetrical. The perfect rhythm of Indus order begins to stutter, and yet the people endure. This is not a civilization that falls screaming. Its size adapts and walks away. Families pack up what they can carry, a set of weights, a jar, a seal, a few copper tools. They leave behind the rest, locking doors that no one will ever open again. They move eastward toward the promise of rain, toward the plains of the Ganges, where water still flows. The city doesn't burn, it empties. At Mohenjo-Daro, the decline is slower still. The great bath still holds water, though fewer come to use it. The drains, once immaculate, clog with silt. The once perfect streets grow uneven as repairs falter. The wells, hundreds of them, are still dug and redone, their depth a measure of desperation. A century passes, then another. The city persists, but it no longer shines. Imagine the feeling of those last generations, the quiet dread of watching a world designed for stability begin to tremble. The merchants, who remember a time when trade routes were crowded, now see only empty roads. The farmers, who once trusted the river, watch its banks collapse. The engineers, who once prided themselves on control, must finally admit you cannot drain the wind or brick the sky. Even the symbols begin to fade. The seals become simpler, the inscriptions fewer. The unicorn, once a proud emblem, appears less often. The script, the silent language of trade and identity, ceases to be carved. The civilization that once spoke through stone and measurement now falls silent not by conquest, but by exhaustion. But the Indus people do not vanish. They change. In the eastern plains, their descendants learn to farm new crops, rice millet, and to live by new rivers. They adapt to wetter climates and different soils, blending their knowledge with new traditions. The great cities die, but their ways persist, the love of cleanliness, the use of weights and measures, the layout of villages around courtyards, the reverence for water as sacred. The Indus does not end. It dissolves into the subcontinent, becoming part of its DNA. Archaeologists will later puzzle over the silence. They will dig through the ruins and find no layer of ash, no toppled statues, no evidence of war. Instead, they'll find the patient traces of retreat, a civilization, leaving quietly, as if refusing to make a scene. In the Great Bath, the last water evaporates, leaving behind a thin crust of salt. In the workshops, unfinished beads lie beside drills, as if the craftsmen simply set them down mid-task and never returned. In the wells, dust settles like a final offering. The climate continues its slow betrayal. The once mighty Saraswati River, perhaps the mythical Ghaggar Hakra, dries completely, leaving behind only ghost channels visible from the sky. Without her waters, the settlements along her banks vanish. The desert creeps in, swallowing the traces of their work. It's tempting to mourn them, but there is dignity in this kind of ending. The Indus people did not collapse. They withdrew, with grace, taking their wisdom with them. In their absence, new cultures will rise. The Indo-Aryans will enter the plains, bringing their hymns and horses. The Vedic age will dawn, and from its rituals, echoes of the Indus will resurface purification by water reverence for fire, the sanctity of order. The civilization that once whispered through brick will now sing through verse. There is no record of the moment when the last citizens of Mohenjo-Daro decided to leave. No epic of exile, no lamentation etched into clay. One season perhaps the wells began to yield brackish water. The next, the rains came too late. A granary emptied, a market closed, and one by one the lamps in the workshops were not relit. Life didn't end here, it moved. The Indus civilization, which had spent centuries perfecting stillness, now learned the art of motion. From the dry ruins of Sind to the fading floodplains of the Ravi families, packed their possessions with quiet resolve. They took what mattered most, not wealth or monuments, but knowledge. The ratio of the brick, the art of drainage, the rhythm of measurement and trade. In carts pulled by humped cattle, they carried small clay jars of seeds, carved stone weights, and strings of beads to barter with the next settlement. Civilization itself became portable. The migrations began as trickles, villages peeling away from their rivers, seeking better rains, better soil, better hope. Some followed the retreating Saraswati, that once mighty river, whose dry bed now shimmered like a scar across the desert. Others drifted eastward toward the foothills of the Himalayas, where new streams promised stability. The rest crossed into the fertile plains of the Ganges Basin, a landscape greener but wilder, awaiting cultivation. There, amid new forests and unfamiliar monsoons, they began again. Their cities were smaller now, clusters of huts around wells, with streets less precise but still purposeful. They no longer built citadels of brick, but the impulse to organize never left them. Even in these humbler settlements, the grid returns faint but recognizable, like a memory refusing to fade. Wells still dot the courtyards. Drains still run along the edges. It is as if the ghost of Mohenjo-Daro whispers beneath every foundation, "Keep the water clean. Keep the streets straight." Trade continues too, though on a reduced scale. The grand networks that once linked the Arabian Sea to Mesopotamia shrink to regional loops. Copper from the Aravalli Hills, timber from the Ganges forests, shells from Gujarat, all circulate among local markets. The famous seals disappear, but new tokens emerge, simple terracotta discs, marked by hand instead of engraved. The standardized system of weights persists. Fairness is still non-negotiable. The spirit of the Indus economy lingers long after its cities fall silent. Culturally, the transition is invisible but profound. The uniformity that once defined their civilization gives way to diversity. Without the magnetic order of their great cities, communities begin to evolve distinct dialects, customs, and deities. The mother goddess remains her terracotta form, reshaped in local clay. Fire altars continue to burn, though in simpler form. The sacred peepal tree still shades the village center. The religious ideas of the Indus are not abandoned. They scatter, taking root wherever people settle. The exodus does not feel like collapse to those living it. To them, it is adaptation, the same pragmatic adjustment their ancestors practiced for centuries. When rivers shift, follow them. When floods fail, move east. When cities crumble, rebuild smaller. In this continuity, through change, lies the genius of the Indus people. They understood that permanence is an illusion, but pattern can be eternal. Imagine one such caravan leaving Harappa at dusk. Oxen groan under their loads, carts creak, and the sun glows red over the empty walls. Behind them, the city stands half abandoned, its drains clogged, its wells half full. Ahead lies uncertainty, but also possibility. Children ride on the cart's edges, dangling their legs in the dust. One of them clutches a toy, a clay bull on wheels, chipped but loved. He doesn't know that he's carrying the last ember of one of humanity's greatest experiments. In time, new settlements rise in the Ganges Plains sites, like Bhagwanpura, Alamgirpur, and Rakhigarhi, transitional worlds between the old Harappan precision and the emerging rural cultures of the Vedic age. Here, the pottery changes, less standardized, more handmade, decorated in black and red. Yet the wheel keeps turning. The idea of craft persists, even if the perfection of Mohenjo-Daro has given way to improvisation. It is in this slow decentralization that the Indus civilization truly transforms. What was once a great urban network becomes a constellation of small, self-reliant communities. Some thrive by farming millet and rice in the new climates. Others return to pastoral life, following herds across the plains. The zebu cattle, those patient humped beasts that once pulled plows in the Indus, become companions on the move, living repositories of continuity. This decentralization also changes identity. Without cities to unite them, the people of the Indus world begin to look inward, defining themselves not through civic pride, but through kinship, village, and ritual. Fire and water remain sacred, but now the rituals are simpler, performed in courtyards instead of baths, at hearths instead of citadels. Over generations, these practices will evolve into the spiritual frameworks recognizable millennia later in Vedic and Hindu traditions. The Harappans may have lost their cities, but not their sense of the sacred. Archaeologists will later call this period the late Harappan phase, a phrase that sounds like decline, but is really migration in disguise. It is the story of a people replanting themselves. Their bricks crumble, but their blueprints endure in the village plans of early India, in the weights of its traders, in the reverence its cultures still show for rivers. As centuries pass, the old heartland along the Indus grows quieter. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro turn to dust. Birds nest in the cracks of the citadel walls. Sand buries the drains that once carried clean water. The desert reclaims Dholavira, turning its reservoirs into hollow basins of salt. But eastward, life flourishes again. In the Ganges basin, the first rice paddies spread like mirrors beneath the monsoon sky. New towns emerge simpler, yes, but pulsing with vitality. The people there no longer think of themselves as Harappans, but the habits remain cleanliness, cooperation, balance. A traveler from another world could stand in one of these new villages and still sense the same pulse that once beat through Mohenjo-Daro. The hum of order, the instinct to build with precision, the quiet pride in getting the small things right. At night, when the rains finally return, they fall softly across this new landscape. The air smells of wet soil and smoke. Somewhere a woman kneels by her hearth and whispers a blessing to the fire. Somewhere else a farmer steps outside, face lifted to the drizzle, feeling both relief and memory. The rain has come again, and though the old rivers are gone, life continues to flow. Civilizations often die loudly, leaving behind broken statues and the noise of collapse. The Indus died like a sigh, its greatness slipping gently into the grain of everyday life. Its people became anonymous again. Farmers, herders, potters, singers. But through them, its spirit endured, diffused into every future culture that touched the Indian soil. They were not conquered. They simply moved on. Civilizations rarely die. They dissolve slowly, quietly, into the skin of the world that succeeds them. The Indus Valley Civilization left no kings to remember, no epics to recite its glories, no stele carved with last words. And yet its fingerprints lie everywhere in South Asia's story, on every courtyard, every village street, every ritual gesture that still begins with water and ends with fire. The Harappans vanished, yes, but their habits endured, reappearing in forms so familiar that we rarely notice they are ancient. Take, for instance, the idea of measure. The Indus people lived by it. Their bricks, their streets, their weights, all conformed to invisible rules of proportion. That obsession with precision did not fade when their cities did. The standardized cubical weights of Harappa ratios in binary and decimal progression evolved into the measuring systems of later India. The very Sanskrit word mana, measure, may echo their vanished tongue. The careful weighing of grain in village markets, the ritual precision of Vedic offerings, measured by handfuls and spoonfuls, these are not new inventions, but the long afterlife of Harappan reason. Or look to their mastery of water. When the Harappans built drains and baths, they were not simply keeping clean, they were practicing faith through function. That reverence for purity survived the fall of their cities. In the Vedic hymns that appeared centuries later, water is called the cleanser of sin, the bearer of strength. The act of ritual bathing in rivers, the Ganges, the Saraswati, the Sindhu, feels like an echo of the great bath itself, a memory older than writing. The Indus people washed because it was logical. Their descendants washed because it was sacred. Somewhere between the two, science became ritual. Even the layout of Indian towns today still hums faintly with Harappan geometry. The narrow lanes of Rajasthan villages, the central courtyards, the alignment of houses toward prevailing winds, all mirror principles first tested at Mohenjo-Daro. The same instinct for ventilation, drainage, and shade shapes homes from Sindh to Bengal. Rural India, in its quiet way, is still engineered by ghosts. Their legacy also breathes in textiles. The Indus farmers cultivated cotton, the earliest known in the world, and wove it into fine cloth long before pharaohs wore linen. That craft never stopped. The spinning wheel, the careful combing of fiber, the rhythmic shuttle of looms, all these are continuations of an unbroken thread. When later generations sat by the hearth, turning cotton into cloth, they were repeating gestures performed under Indus skies 4,000 years earlier. Even Gandhi, spinning his charkha in the 20th century, unknowingly turned a wheel that had begun spinning in Harappan courtyards. Animal husbandry, too, carried their imprint. The humped zebu cattle that once pulled Indus plows still populate South Asia, sacred now as symbols of patience and divine strength. The water buffalo, the goat, the sheep, all bred by those early farmers, remain at the center of rural life. The Harappans domesticated more than animals. They domesticated coexistence with them. That reverence matured into myth, the bull of Shiva's Nandi, the sacred cow of Vedic lore, the animal companions that walk calmly through modern streets. The Indus herders became Hindu shepherds, their beasts transfigured into deities. And in the rituals, the echoes grow louder. The Indus worshipped no towering idols, but they revered fertility, fire, and flowing water. The Vedic peoples, who came later, sang hymns to Agni, the fire god, and Soma, the sacred drink, both celebrated with offerings poured into flame or stream. Between them runs a quiet lineage of symbolism, the purification of fire, the renewal of water, the balance of opposites. Even the peepal tree, carved again and again on Harappan seals, survives as a sacred Bodhi tree, beneath which enlightenment is sought. Urban planning, too, left its invisible map. Later, Indian cities, Taxila, Pataliputra, even parts of ancient Delhi, follow grid patterns astonishingly similar to those of Harappan towns, main avenues intersecting side lanes at right angles, drainage channels laid beneath streets. Where later empires built walls of stone, the Harappans built logic. That logic lingered, transmitted not by conquest, but by craft tradition engineers, teaching apprentices masons, passing on measurements, families, repeating what simply worked. Even in language, faint traces may remain. The Dravidian tongues of southern India carry echoes that some scholars believe once whispered along the Indus. Words for rice tooth plow and fish find parallels between Proto-Dravidian roots and symbols from Harappan seals. If true, then every time a Tamil farmer names his field, or a Telugu trader measures his grain, he may be speaking with syllables first shaped in the workshops of Harappa. But perhaps the most enduring inheritance of all is philosophical. The Indus world prized order, not order, enforced by kings, but achieved through consensus. Every brick, every drain, every shared standard testified to cooperation without coercion. Centuries later, India's village assemblies, its panchayats, would embody the same principal decisions made locally, communally, quietly. A civilization that once governed without rulers seeded a political instinct that still values negotiation over command. Even the Harappans' modesty in death left its shadow. Their burials were simple, their monuments absent, their remembrance collective. That humility, an emphasis on continuity over individuality, flows naturally into later South Asian thought reincarnation, over immortality duty, over fame community, over self, over, to the Indus people, greatness was not what you carved in stone, but what endured in use. So when we look for the Indus Valley today, we find it not in museums or textbooks, but in gestures, the woman drawing water from a courtyard well, the craftsman marking exact cuts on stone, the farmer blessing the river before sowing seed. We find it in the measured rhythm of a loom, in the geometry of a street corner, that drains just right after rain, and the reverence for cleanliness that still defines ritual life. For nearly 4,000 years, the Indus Valley slept beneath the dust, its cities flattened into mounds, its bricks reused its name, forgotten. The rivers shifted, the stories blurred, and the world simply moved on. Then in the age of coal and iron, the modern world, loud, mechanical, impatient, came rolling right over it on steel wheels. It was 1856. The British Empire was busy stitching together its railway lines across India, a grand industrial project meant to bind the colony by steam. Near the small Punjabi town of Harappa, a crew of local laborers was busy digging ballast broken stone and brick to fill under the new tracks. The men found plenty, in fact more than plenty. All around them lay ancient sun-baked bricks, uniform strong, perfectly rectangular. Thousands of them buried in the mound the locals called Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. The foreman was delighted. No need to quarry new material. The earth had kindly provided. So the crew hacked into the mound and carted away the past by the wagon load. Mile after mile of the new Lahore-Karachi railway was paved atop the ruins of a lost city. The irony was perfect. The steam engine, symbol of modern progress, unknowingly ran on the bones of the world's first planned civilization. Decades passed before anyone realized what had happened. Scholars here and there noted curious old mounds scattered across Sindh and Punjab, but most assumed they were medieval ruins. It wasn't until the early 1900s that a handful of archaeologists began to suspect something deeper, something older than Babylon, older than Egypt, perhaps as old as the dawn itself. When Sir John Marshall, the dignified Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, first visited the sites in the 1920s, he looked out across the low mounds of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro and felt a tremor of wonder. Under those quiet hills, his team began to uncover streets, paved with baked brick, straight as Roman roads, but centuries older. There were drains, covered sloped systematic. There were houses with bathrooms and wells. And no Marshall decided these were not medieval ruins at all. This was a lost urban world. The discovery was staggering. Beneath the sands of Sindh lay cities planned to the inch, raised on platforms to defy floods, equipped with sanitation systems more advanced than those of 19th century London. The Victorians, who liked to imagine civilization as a ladder with Europe at the top, suddenly found the ladder upside down. One can almost picture a British archaeologist in his pith helmet blinking in disbelief, mumbling, "Good heavens, we've just built railways over an entire civilization." Soon, more cities emerged from the earth. Mohenjo-Daro, Calibangan, Lothal, Dolavira. Mortimer Wheeler, fiery and theatrical, joined the efforts in the 1940s, declaring the ruins a world that knew drains before it knew war. His excavations revealed the famous Great Bath, the citadel walls, the granaries, the delicate seals carved with unicorns and bulls. Each artifact pushed the Indus people further out of myth and into history. But the rediscovery was not just archaeological, it was existential. For centuries, the narrative of civilization had begun in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Now quietly, India joined that sacred triad. The Steam Age Empire had accidentally tripped over one far older and far more peaceful than itself. There is a gentle cosmic humor in that image. Victorian engineers, in waistcoats and goggles, sweating beside their locomotives, laying rails atop streets where artisans had once fired copper and children had rolled clay toys. The whistle of the steam engine echoing over a buried city that had thrived without engines, without empires, without kings. By the time the 20th century matured, the Indus civilization had been fully resurrected in the world's imagination. The name Harappa entered textbooks. Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead, became a pilgrimage site for historians and dreamers alike. Scholars argued over its script, its people, its fate. But one truth was clear: modern India, and Pakistan had inherited not just land, but legacy. Beneath every field and rail line lay a memory of order, balance, and ingenuity older than history itself. Today, when trains still rattle across those same tracks, few passengers realize what lies beneath them. Beneath the iron rails and the gravel beneath the sleepers and the hum of engines sleep the foundations of a world that once ran on nothing but cooperation and clay. And perhaps if the steam age had listened closely, it might have heard the whisper rising from the earth as the first locomotive rolled over Harappa's bones. We were here long before your engines, and our cities ran just fine. Every civilization that reemerges from the dust brings with it two stories, the one it lived and the one we tell about it. The Indus Valley has both, and neither feels complete without the other. In its lifetime, it was the quietest of great societies. No empires, no conquests, no loud declarations. But in its afterlife, it has become one of the loudest questions in human history. When the first excavations of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro reached the public in the 1920s, the world was stunned. Here was proof that South Asia's story did not begin with foreign arrivals or borrowed glory. It began with its own cities, its own engineers, its own miracle of balance. Indian newspapers of the time wrote with wonder and pride, "We had drains when London was still a swamp." In the decades that followed, the Indus became a mirror into which modern nations looked and saw what they wanted to see. To Indian scholars, it was proof that urban sophistication and scientific thinking were indigenous, not imported. To Pakistani historians, it was the ancestral heartland of a nation whose rivers still trace the same ancient courses. To Western archaeologists, it was a reminder that progress is not a straight line, and that even the mightiest empires rise from forgotten soil. But perhaps no part of the Indus mystery has fueled our imagination more than the script. Those tiny, elegant symbols, etched on seals, scratched on pots, painted on shards, remain stubbornly mute. Linguists, cryptographers, and dreamers have spent a century trying to decode them, each convinced that just one more pattern might unlock the secret. Are they Dravidian Proto-Sanskritic? Something lost entirely, a language without descendants. Computers have analyzed their frequency. Mathematicians have mapped their syntax. Even artificial intelligence has joined the hunt. And yet the seals still stare back at us, like patient riddles. The same 5 or 6 characters, fish, trident, jar, comb, man, arranged with a rhythm that teases understanding but never yields it. The Harappans built cities we can map, and drains we can trace, but their words remain untouched by time, inviolate in their silence. There is a kind of poetry in that the first great civilization of South Asia, refusing to explain itself. The Egyptians spoke through hieroglyphs, the Sumerians through cuneiform, the Chinese through oracle bones. But the Indus, people so meticulous in every other way, left us no Rosetta Stone. Their language lies just beyond reach, like a melody we can hum but not sing. That silence, paradoxically, has made them eternal. Without kings to idolize or wars to glorify, the Indus civilization becomes what we imagine it to be, a parable of balance, a dream of order, without tyranny, of progress, without greed. It's an idea as much as a history, a reminder that human greatness can exist quietly in clean streets and measured bricks, in the dignity of sanitation and the poetry of cooperation. Modern India and Pakistan still feel its pull. School children memorize the names Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro as if they were mythical kingdoms. Archaeological sites become symbols of national pride. Museum exhibits gleam with seals and beads that seem to whisper, "We were organized, we were clean, we were kind." In an age that worships noise and spectacle, the Indus offers an older, gentler definition of civilization, one measured in how people lived, not how they conquered. There's also something universally human about our fascination with what remains unsolved. The Indus script calls to the same part of us that gazes at the stars and wonders. Each seal is a message in a bottle from a people who understood that not all communication requires comprehension. Their silence invites imagination. It lets every generation write its own meaning onto those symbols to see in them whatever we most need to believe. Perhaps that is why the Indus still feels alive. Its mystery refuses closure. Its story is not a lesson in rise and fall, but in continuity, the quiet survival of values rather than monuments. Order, cleanliness, cooperation, restraint. These are not dramatic virtues, but they are enduring ones. The Indus built them into the soil of South Asia so deeply that they still shape how millions live today. Stand once more at Mohenjo-Daro at dusk, where the Indus River glows in the fading sun. The wind drifts through the empty streets, whispering across bricks older than language. You can almost hear the city breathing, slow calm, unbothered by centuries. The drains are silent now, the wells dry, but the pattern remains. No inscription could have spoken more clearly. The Harappans mastered the art that every civilization must learn how to build harmony from chaos, how to speak through silence, and how to leave behind something stronger than words. In the end, that is their message to us, a message not written, but lived. Balance is the truest language of civilization. Completed.